Marcus Williams was halfway through pulling the steering wheel off a dying woman's chest when his 9-year-old daughter screamed his name from the truck behind him. Above them, the North Carolina mountain groaned like a wounded animal ready to bury them all. His hands were already bleeding. The woman's eyes were rolling back, and he had maybe 30 seconds before the next wave of mud and rock came down. But what the CEO trapped in that crushed Range Rover said to him in those 30 seconds, gasping, terrified, barely conscious, would rip apart everything he thought he knew about surviving in this world. Stay until the end, and comment what city you're watching from. I need to see how far this story travels. The windshield wipers on Marcus Williams' 2009 Ford F-150 had been squeaking for the last 40 minutes, fighting a losing battle against rain that felt like God had opened a fire hose on western North Carolina. Marcus's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his jaw tight as he navigated Highway 74 through the Smoky Mountains, a road that twisted like a snake with a grudge. "Daddy, I can't see anything," Zoe said from the back seat, her voice small and tight with fear. "I know, baby. We're almost home." The lie tasted bitter. They weren't almost home. They were barely halfway through the 15-mile stretch between Zoe's elementary school and their rental house in Asheville, and the road was getting worse by the minute. The radio had been screaming warnings all afternoon. Flash flood alerts, landslide, warnings, road closures, spreading across 3 counties like a plague. Marcus should have left the construction site early. Should have picked Zoe up before the worst of it hit. Should have, could have, would have the anthem of every single father who'd ever tried to do everything alone and failed. He was 40 years old and looked 50. 3 years of widowhood had carved lines into his dark skin that hadn't been there when Sarah was alive. His construction job barely covered rent and the mounting bills that multiplied like weeds every month. His shirt still smelled like concrete dust and sweat from the morning shift, his hands calloused and scarred from 10 years of manual labor that was slowly destroying his back. But Zoe was his entire world. His reason for waking up. His reason for not giving up when giving up would have been so much easier. "Dad, stop!" Marcus's head snapped up just in time to see the wall of earth sliding across the road ahead. He slammed both feet on the brake pedal, and the truck went into a violent skid on the slick asphalt. His right arm shot out instinctively across the passenger seat muscle memory from when Sarah used to sit there while his left hand fought the wheel. The truck fishtailed once, twice, then jerked to a stop with the front bumper 3 feet from a churning mass of mud rocks and shattered trees that had buried the entire northbound lane. "Oh God, oh God, oh God." Marcus couldn't catch his breath. "Daddy, it's okay. We're okay." He forced the words out past the hammering of his heart. "We're okay, Zoe." But they weren't okay. Marcus could see that immediately. The landslide had completely blocked the road ahead, a river of earth still moving, still growing, pulling more of the mountainside down with it. Behind them, he heard the deep, terrible crack of splitting rock. They were boxed in between 2 disasters waiting to happen. "We need to turn around," Marcus muttered, throwing the truck into reverse. "We'll take the old service road loop back through." That's when he saw it. Through the rain barely visible in the dying afternoon light, there was a vehicle on the far side of the slide. Not just any vehicle, a black Range Rover top of the line, probably cost more than Marcus had made in the last 5 years. It was pinned beneath a massive pine tree that had been ripped from the mountainside like a weed, the front end crushed accordion-style steam rising from the destroyed engine. And there, pressed against the driver's side window, was a face. A woman, maybe mid-30s, dark hair plastered to her skull, blood running down her cheek. Alive. Her hand was flat against the spider-webbed glass fingers splayed, reaching for something, anything. Her mouth was moving, forming words Marcus couldn't hear but understood with perfect, terrible clarity. "Help me. Please. Help me." Marcus's foot froze over the gas pedal. Every instinct, every shred of common sense, every survival mechanism honed in 2 tours in Iraq screamed at him to reverse to get Zoe to safety, to leave this nightmare in his rearview mirror. The mountain was still moving. He could feel it through the truck's frame, the deep, earth-shaking rumble that meant more was coming. They had maybe 60 seconds, maybe less. "Daddy!" Zoe's voice was very small now. "What's wrong?" Marcus looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror. 9 years old. Her mother's eyes. Her mother's stubborn chin. The best thing he'd ever done with his life. Then he looked back at the woman trapped in the Range Rover, watching her try to push against the window with her one free hand, seeing the panic flooding her face as she realized the mountain wasn't done with her yet. "Zoe, baby, listen to me very carefully." He put the truck in park and turned around to face her fully, his Marine Corps voice coming back, the one that didn't shake, didn't show fear, got people to obey instantly. "I need you to stay in this truck. Doors locked, engine running. Do not open this door for anyone except me. Do you understand?" Zoe's eyes went huge. "You're leaving. There's someone who needs help." "But the mountain?" "I know." Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt, already knowing this was insane, already knowing he might be making the last mistake of his life. "I'll be right back. I promise." "You promise?" Zoe's voice cracked, and Marcus felt something shatter in his chest. She'd heard promises before. From her mother, who'd promised to beat the cancer and didn't. From his own mother, who'd promised to help with Zoe and then moved to Florida the month Sarah died. From the VA, which had promised benefits and delivered paperwork nightmares. Promises were worthless in Zoe's world. But not from him. Never from him. "Have I ever broken a promise to you?" Zoe shook her head, tears mixing with the rain already streaking the windows. "Then trust me. Stay here. Lock the doors." Marcus pushed the truck door open and was instantly assaulted by the storm. The rain wasn't falling. It was attacking, driven by wind that screamed through the mountain pass like something alive and furious. He was soaked within 3 seconds, his work boots sinking into mud that seemed to grab at his feet with every step. Behind him, he heard the click of the locks engaging. Zoe doing what she was told. Good girl. The ground beneath Marcus's feet was moving, shifting, like something organic and malicious. Every step toward the crushed Range Rover was a gamble. Small rocks and debris were already raining down from above, bouncing off his shoulders, stinging his face. He could see where the pine tree had been ripped from the mountainside, leaving a gaping wound that was hemorrhaging mud and stone. More was coming. He could feel it in the vibrations beneath his boots, could hear it in the deep groan of stressed earth. 30 seconds maybe. 40 if they were lucky. Marcus reached the Range Rover and immediately understood how bad it was. The pine tree, easily 3 feet in diameter, had landed with such force that it had driven the entire engine block back into the cabin. The driver's door was bent inward at an angle that shouldn't be possible, jammed tight against the frame. He pressed his face close to the shattered window. Up close, he could see the woman more clearly now. Mid-30s, wearing what had been an expensive gray suit, now torn and soaked with blood. Her face was cut in multiple places, glass embedded in her right cheek, and her left arm was pinned beneath something Marcus couldn't see from this angle. But her eyes, brown and sharp, despite the pain, locked onto his with desperate intensity. "Can you hear me?" Marcus shouted over the roar of wind and rain. "Yes?" Her voice was muffled, but clear enough. "Please, you have to get me out. There's more coming. I can hear it." "I know. I'm going to try the door. Can you move it all?" "My arm, something's on it, I can't." Her voice broke, panic flooding in. "Please don't leave me here." "I'm not leaving." Marcus grabbed the door handle and pulled. Nothing. He braced his foot against the frame and pulled again, putting every ounce of strength his 10 years of construction work had built into his shoulders and back. The metal groaned in protest, but didn't budge. "It's not working!" The woman's cry was edging toward hysteria. Marcus's mind raced. He looked around, desperately searching for something, anything he could use. His eyes landed on a fallen branch, thick and solid, about 20 yards away. Not ideal, but it might work as a lever. "Hold on!" he shouted, sprinting toward the branch. The ground lurched beneath him, and Marcus went down hard, palms slamming into gravel and mud. Pain shot up both arms, but he ignored it, scrambling back to his feet and grabbing the branch. It was heavier than it looked, waterlogged, but he managed to drag it back to the SUV. Through the rear window of his truck, he could see Zoe's face pressed against the glass, watching him with wide, terrified eyes. "Stay there, baby. Just stay there." Marcus wedged one end of the branch into the gap between the door and the frame, then positioned himself to use it as a lever. "When I say go, you push from your side. Understand?" The woman nodded, positioning her free hand against the door's interior. 1, 2, 3, go. Marcus threw his entire body weight onto the branch. The woman pushed. The metal screamed in protest, and for one horrible moment, nothing happened. Then, crack. The sound came from above them, sharp and final as a gunshot. Marcus's head snapped up just in time to see another section of the mountainside beginning to collapse. A wall of mud and rock, easily 20 feet high, sliding toward them like a tsunami made of earth. They had 10 seconds, maybe less. No time. Marcus abandoned the branch and grabbed the door with both hands. The edge was sharp, biting into his palms, drawing blood instantly, but he didn't care. Blood mixed with rain as he pulled with everything he had, every muscle in his body screaming. "Push now!" The woman screamed, throwing her weight against the door with her one free arm. Marcus's vision blurred with rain and effort, his boots slipping in the mud. His back was going to give out. His hands were on fire, and the mountain was coming, and they were both going to die here, and Zoe was going to watch it happen. The door flew open. Marcus stumbled backward, nearly fell but caught himself. No time to celebrate. He lunged forward, reaching into the cabin. Up close, he could see that the woman's arm wasn't just pinned. It was trapped beneath the collapsed steering column, which had been driven back by the tree's impact. Her hand was bent at an unnatural angle, clearly broken. "This is going to hurt," Marcus warned. "I don't care. Just get me out." Marcus gripped the steering column with both hands, ignoring the way the sharp metal edges cut deeper into his already bleeding palms. He pulled upward, and the woman screamed as the pressure shifted, but it was moving. Inch by terrible inch. "Pull your arm out now." The woman didn't hesitate. With a cry that was half pain, half desperation, she yanked her arm free. Marcus saw the damage. Her wrist was definitely broken, bent at a sickening angle. But there was no time to assess it further. The mountain was screaming now, the rumble so loud it drowned out even the thunder. Marcus grabbed the woman around the waist and hauled her from the vehicle just as the first wave of mud slammed into the Range Rover's passenger side. The vehicle groaned, metal shrieking, as it was shoved several feet across the road. "Run!" Marcus shouted, but the woman's legs gave out the moment her feet touched ground. Without thinking, Marcus swept her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, or maybe adrenaline was making him stronger, and ran. Behind them, the mountain was consuming everything. The Range Rover disappeared beneath the flowing mud, swallowed whole, as if it had never existed. Trees snapped like matchsticks. Boulders the size of cars tumbled past, crushing everything in their path. The sound was apocalyptic, a roar that seemed to come from the earth's very core. Marcus's legs pumped desperately, his boots fighting for purchase on the unstable ground. The woman clung to him, her good arm wrapped around his neck, her face buried against his shoulder. He could feel her shaking, shock, fear, pain. Probably all three. 40 feet from his truck. 30. 20. The ground lurched violently, and Marcus went down, tucking his body around the woman's as they hit the mud. The impact drove the air from his lungs, but he didn't let go. Couldn't let go. He rolled, trying to get his feet back under him, when he heard Zoe's voice cutting through the chaos. "Dad! Dad!" Marcus's head snapped toward his truck. Zoe had unlocked the door and was climbing out, her small face a mask of absolute terror. "No, Zoe, stay in the car!" Marcus screamed, but his daughter was beyond hearing. She was running toward him, her little legs churning through the mud, tears streaming down her face. Everything moved in slow motion. Marcus saw another section of the mountain begin to give way directly above where Zoe was running. He saw the massive boulder had to weigh 2 tons beginning to tumble down. He saw his daughter's face so full of love and fear that it physically hurt to look at. With strength he didn't know he possessed, Marcus surged to his feet, still holding the injured woman, and ran toward Zoe. He closed the distance in seconds that felt like hours. The boulder was falling, picking up speed, and it was going to land exactly where his daughter would be in 3 more steps. Marcus reached Zoe and in one fluid motion swept her up with his free arm, while simultaneously diving forward. The 3 of them, Marcus, Zoe, and the stranger, tumbled together across the muddy road, rolling until they slammed against the guardrail on the far side of the highway. The boulder hit the ground where they'd been standing with such force that Marcus felt it in his bones, felt it rattle his teeth. Smaller rocks and debris rained down around them, and for several seconds he was certain they were all going to die anyway. He curled his body around both Zoe and the woman, making himself a shield. Feeling stones pelt his back like punishment for every stupid decision that had led to this moment. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The rumbling faded to a distant grumble. The rain continued, but the mountain had exhausted its rage, at least for now. Marcus lay there gasping for air, feeling Zoe sobbing against his chest and the stranger's ragged breathing against his neck. They were alive. Somehow, impossibly, they were alive. "Daddy!" Zoe hiccuped, her small hands clutching his soaked shirt. I thought you were going to die." "Shh, baby girl. It's okay. We're okay." Marcus's voice was rough, scraped raw by fear and exertion. He loosened his grip slightly enough to check both Zoe and the woman for injuries. Zoe seemed fine, terrified, but physically unharmed. The woman's wrist was a disaster, and she had multiple cuts and bruises blooming across her face and arms, but she was conscious and breathing. "Thank you," the woman whispered, and Marcus realized she was crying. Silent tears mixed with rain on her face, carving clean paths through the mud. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Marcus didn't know what to say. His hands were bleeding freely now, his back felt like one giant bruise, and he was pretty sure he'd just used up whatever divine favor he'd had left in this world. But they were alive. It was Zoe who heard it first, her head lifting from Marcus's chest. "Dad, listen." Through the rain, barely audible at first, but growing steadily louder, came the wail of sirens. Multiple sirens. Emergency services were coming. Someone must have called it in, probably from one of the houses further down the mountain. "We need to move," Marcus said, though his body protested the very idea. "Get closer to the road where they can see us." Slowly, carefully, he helped the woman to her feet. She swayed dangerously, clearly, going into shock, and he kept his arm around her waist to steady her. With his other hand, he held Zoe close. Together, the unlikely trio made their way to what remained of the clear road, putting distance between themselves and the devastation behind them. The woman leaned heavily against Marcus, her strength clearly fading fast. "I don't even know your name," she said, her voice weak but determined. Marcus Williams. This is my daughter Zoe." Catherine Reid." She paused, gathering herself with visible effort. "You saved my life, Marcus Williams. You could have left me there, should have left me there. You had every reason to keep driving to protect your daughter, but you didn't." "Why?" Marcus looked down at Zoe, who was watching him with those eyes that saw everything, understood everything. Then he looked back at Catherine. "Because someone needed help," he said simply. "And because I wanted my daughter to know that's what you do. You help. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Catherine stared at him for a long moment, something unreadable flickering across her face. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words were cut off by the arrival of the first emergency vehicle cresting the hill, its lights painting the devastation in alternating red and blue. What happened next would blur in Marcus's memory later. There were paramedics and firefighters' questions shouted over the rain emergency blankets that did little against the bone-deep cold and careful examinations of their injuries. Marcus's hands were cleaned and bandaged, the deep cuts from the metal documented and photographed. Zoe was checked for shock and minor injuries pronounced miraculously unharmed. Catherine's wrist was splinted, her various lacerations treated with quick efficiency, and the paramedics wanted to transport her immediately to Asheville Regional Medical Center, but she refused to get in the ambulance until she'd said something to Marcus. "Wait," she called out, pulling against the paramedic trying to guide her toward the waiting vehicle. "Marcus, please." He walked over Zoe's hand, still firmly in his own. Up close, even battered and covered in mud, Catherine Reid looked like someone important. There was something in the way she carried herself, even injured and exhausted, the bearing of someone used to making decisions that mattered. "I need you to understand something," Catherine said, her brown eyes intense despite her obvious pain. She reached into her jacket pocket with her good hand and pulled out a waterlogged business card, pressing it into Marcus's palm. "This is who I am, where I work. I'm the CEO of Reid Construction and Development. Maybe you've heard of it." Marcus had vaguely. Some big company that built office buildings and apartment complexes. Big enough to be in the news sometimes. "I don't care who you are," Marcus said honestly. "I'm just glad you're okay." Catherine laughed, but it was a sound tinged with tears. "You should care. Because you just saved the life of someone who has resources, Marcus. Real resources. And I don't forget debts, especially not ones like this." "I don't want—" Marcus started, but Catherine held up her good hand. "I know you don't want anything. That's clear. That's exactly why—" She paused, seeming to make some internal decision. "That's why I'm going to help you anyway. You and Zoe both. I don't know how yet, but I will. That's a promise." The paramedics were getting insistent now, practically lifting Catherine toward the ambulance. "I keep my promises too," she said, her voice rising to be heard over the commotion. "Remember that, Marcus Williams. I keep my promises." Then she was gone, the ambulance pulling away with lights flashing, leaving Marcus and Zoe standing in the rain, with a handful of emergency personnel and a business card that was probably ruined anyway. "Is she a queen?" Zoe asked, tugging on Marcus's hand. Marcus looked down at his daughter, then back at the departing ambulance. "I don't know what she is, baby, but I think we just met someone who's going to change our lives." "You changed her life first," Zoe said, with the simple conviction of a 9-year-old who knew her father was the best person in the world. "You saved her. Maybe we saved each other." Marcus murmured more to himself than to Zoe. A firefighter offered them a ride down the mountain, and Marcus accepted gratefully. As they climbed into the warm cab of the fire truck, Marcus looked at the ruined business card in his hand. The ink was bleeding away in the rain, but he could still make out the name, Catherine Reid, CEO, Reid Construction and Development, and a phone number barely legible, but still there. Marcus tucked the card carefully into his wallet next to the picture of Sarah he still carried. He didn't know why he was saving it. Didn't know if he'd ever use it. Rich people said things in moments of crisis, meant them sincerely, then went back to their real lives and forgot about the construction workers who'd helped them. That's how the world worked. But as the fire truck pulled away from the disaster zone, carrying them toward home, toward safety, toward whatever came next, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that Catherine Reid was different. And that stopping on that rain-soaked road, risking everything for a stranger, might have just changed the course of his and Zoe's life in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. He had no idea how right he was. The hot water ran out after 8 minutes, but Marcus stayed in the shower anyway, letting the cold stream wash the remaining mud from his hair, while his bandaged hands throbbed with a pain that felt almost welcome. It meant he was alive. It meant Zoe was safe in the living room, probably already asleep on the couch, despite her insistence that she wasn't tired. It meant the day was finally over. Except it wasn't over. Not really. Marcus turned off the water and stood dripping on the cracked linoleum floor of their tiny bathroom, staring at his reflection in the fogged mirror. A stranger looked back at him, face gaunt with exhaustion, eyes shadowed with something he couldn't quite name. Fear, maybe. Or the residue of choices that felt too big for someone like him to have made. He should have driven away. Every rational part of his brain knew that. Zoe was his responsibility, his priority, the only thing that mattered in this world. And yet he'd run toward danger instead of away from it, had gambled with the most precious thing in his life to save someone he didn't even know. Catherine Reid, CEO. Someone important enough to have resources, whatever that meant. Marcus dried off with their one decent towel and pulled on clean clothes, faded jeans, and a t-shirt that had seen better days 5 years ago. His work clothes sat in a muddy heap in the corner, probably ruined. Great. That was another expense he couldn't afford. When he opened the bathroom door, steam billowing out behind him, he found Zoe sitting cross-legged on their sagging couch, very much not asleep. She was still in her school clothes, though she'd at least kicked off her muddy shoes. Her backpack sat beside her, and she was clutching Mr. Bear, the stuffed animal that had been Sarah's last gift to her before the cancer took her. "Zoe, you should be in bed." "I can't sleep." Her voice was small, uncertain in a way that made Marcus's chest ache. "Every time I close my eyes, I see the mountain falling. I see you under it." Marcus sat down beside her, and Zoe immediately curled into his side. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, careful of his bandaged hands. "But I'm not under it. I'm right here." "You could have been." Zoe's fingers twisted in Mr. Bear's worn fur. "You could have died saving that lady. Then what would I do?" The question hung in the air like smoke, impossible to dispel. Marcus had asked himself the same thing 100 times since they'd gotten home. What would Zoe have done if that boulder had found its mark? If the mountain had swallowed him whole? She had no other parent, no safety net, no one else in the world who'd fight for her the way he did. "I didn't die," Marcus said finally. "We're both okay." "But you could have." Zoe pulled back to look at him, and her eyes were too old, too knowing for 9 years. "Mom left because the cancer took her. If you died because you tried to save someone else, that would mean I wasn't important enough for you to stay safe." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "Zoe, no. That's not..." He cupped her face gently with his bandaged hands, making her look at him. "Listen to me, sweetheart. What I did today had nothing to do with you not being important enough. You're everything. You're the reason I wake up, the reason I work myself to the bone, the reason I keep going when everything feels impossible. Do you understand that? Then why'd you risk it? Why'd you go help her?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, searching for words that would make sense to a 9-year-old, that would help her understand something he barely understood himself. "Because I want you to grow up knowing that we help people even when it's scary, even when it costs us something. That's what makes us good, Zoe. That's what makes us human. And I need you to be good in this world, because it's going to be hard enough as it is." Zoe considered this, her small face serious. "Is that why you always help Mrs. Chen carry her groceries? And why you fixed Mr. Patterson's fence, even though he never paid you?" "Yeah, baby, that's why. Even when we don't have money for new shoes." Marcus winced. Zoe's sneakers were too small, pinching her toes. He'd been saving up for new ones, but the truck had needed repairs last month, and then there'd been the electricity bill he couldn't ignore anymore, and the new shoes kept getting pushed further down the list of necessities they couldn't afford. "Even then," he said quietly. Zoe nodded slowly, then burrowed back into his side. "The Lady Catherine, she seemed really nice, even though she was hurt and scared." "She did, didn't she? She said she'd help us. Do you think she meant it?" Marcus thought about the intensity in Catherine Reid's eyes, the way she'd clutched that business card like it was a lifeline she was throwing him. "I don't know, Em. Rich people say things sometimes. They mean it in the moment, but then they go back to their lives and forget about people like us." Mom said things too, Zoe whispered. She said she'd beat the cancer. She said she'd see me grow up. And there it was. The wound that never quite healed the ghost that haunted their small apartment, with its broken promises and abandoned hopes. Sarah Williams had fought the breast cancer for 2 years, had promised Zoe every single day that she was going to be fine, that they'd grow old together, that Zoe would have her mother at her high school graduation and her wedding and the birth of her own children. Then Sarah died on a Tuesday morning in March, and all those promises died with her. "Catherine's not your mom," Marcus said firmly. "And maybe she will help, maybe she won't. But either way, we're going to be okay. We've always been okay, right?" "Right," Zoe echoed, but she didn't sound convinced. They sat together in the quiet of their small living room, listening to the rain that had finally softened to a gentle patter against the windows. The apartment was tiny one-bedroom that Zoe had claimed a pull-out couch for Marcus, a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in, and a bathroom where everything leaked. But it was theirs. It was home. Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket, startling them both. He pulled it out and frowned at the unknown number glowing on the screen. "Who is it?" Zoe asked. "I don't know." Marcus answered cautiously. "Hello, Mr. Williams. Marcus Williams." The voice was crisp, professional female. "Yes, who's this?" "My name is Diana Torres. I'm calling on behalf of Catherine Reid. She wanted me to reach out to you this evening to make sure you and your daughter arrived home safely." Marcus's eyebrows rose. "We're fine. How did you get my number?" "Ms. Reid is quite resourceful," Diana replied, and Marcus could hear the smile in her voice. "She also wanted me to inform you that she's been admitted to Asheville Regional for observation and surgery on her wrist tomorrow morning. She's asking if you might be willing to visit. She'd like to thank you properly." "That's not necessary. I'm just glad she's okay." "Nevertheless, she's quite insistent. Would tomorrow afternoon work for you, around 2? Marcus looked at Zoe, who was watching him with wide, curious eyes. Tomorrow was Saturday. He didn't have work, and Zoe didn't have school. They usually spent Saturdays at the park or the library making the most of free entertainment. A trip to the hospital would eat up gas money he didn't really have. But, "I suppose we could stop by," Marcus heard himself say. "Wonderful. I'll let Ms. Reid know. She's in room 412. And Mr. Morrison." Diana's voice softened slightly. "Thank you for what you did today. Catherine she's important to a lot of people. You gave her back to us." The line went dead before Marcus could respond. "We're going to see her?" Zoe asked, perking up. "Looks like it." "Can I bring her something, Mrs.? Chen says you should always bring something when you visit sick people." Marcus smiled despite himself. "What did you have in mind?" Zoe thought for a moment, her face scrunched up in concentration. "I could draw her a picture of something happy, so she doesn't think about the scary parts." "That's a really good idea, sweetheart." Zoe scrambled off the couch and ran to the kitchen table where her school supplies were scattered. Marcus watched as she selected a fresh piece of paper and her box of crayons, then set to work with the intense focus that always amazed him. She might be only 9, but when Zoe decided to do something, she did it with her whole heart. Marcus's phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Ray, his foreman at the construction site. "You okay, man? Heard about the landslide on Highway 74. That's your route home, right?" Marcus texted back. "Got caught in it, but we're fine. Tomorrow's still on." The response came quickly. "About that. Client pushed timeline up. Need everyone in Sunday too. Triple time for weekend work. You in?" Marcus stared at the message. Sunday was supposed to be his day with Zoe. They had a routine pancakes in the morning cartoons, maybe a trip to the dollar store if he had a few bucks to spare. It was sacred time, the kind of time that kept them glued together when everything else tried to pull them apart. But triple time. That was money he desperately needed. That was new shoes for Zoe, maybe even enough left over to fix the leak in the bathroom ceiling that was getting worse every day. He looked over at Zoe, bent over her drawing tongue poking out in concentration. She'd understand. She always understood, even when she shouldn't have to. "I'm in," Marcus typed back. The reply was immediate. "Good man, 6 a.m. start." Marcus set the phone down and rubbed his eyes. The day's adrenaline was finally wearing off, leaving behind an exhaustion so profound it felt like gravity had doubled. His hands ached, his back ached, everything ached. "Daddy, look!" Zoe held up her drawing, beaming with pride. Marcus took it carefully, mindful of his bandaged fingers. She'd drawn 3 figures, a tall one, a small one, and a medium one with dark hair. They were standing under a rainbow holding hands, with a big sun smiling down on them. At the bottom, in Zoe's careful printing, it said, "Thank you for being brave. Love, Zoe." "It's perfect, Em." "You think she'll like it?" "I think she'll love it." Marcus felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly. Bedtime now. For real this time. Zoe didn't argue. She gathered up Mr. Bear and her drawing, then took Marcus's hand as they walked to her bedroom. It was barely big enough for the twin bed and small dresser they'd gotten from the church donation center. But Zoe had made it her own, with drawings taped to the walls and a nightlight shaped like a butterfly that cast gentle shadows across the ceiling. Marcus tucked her in, pulling the blankets up to her chin. "Sweet dreams, baby girl." "Dad?" Zoe's voice was sleepy now, finally giving in to exhaustion. "I'm glad you helped her, even if it was scary. You're like a superhero." "Superheroes wear capes. I just wear old t-shirts." "Superheroes are brave. You're the bravest person I know." The words settled over Marcus like a weight and a gift at the same time. He wasn't brave. He was terrified every single day of failing Zoe, of not being enough, of the 1,000 small disasters that could destroy their fragile life together. But if his daughter thought he was brave, maybe he could pretend to be just a little longer. "Sleep tight, Zoe. Love you." "Love you too, Daddy. More than anything." Marcus left the door cracked open the way Zoe liked it and made his way to the living room. The pull-out couch was already extended from the night before. He never bothered putting it away anymore. He collapsed onto it, not even pulling the covers up, and stared at the water-stained ceiling. Tomorrow he'd visit Catherine Reid in the hospital. He'd say thank you for her concern, accept her gratitude, and then he'd go back to his life. Because people like her and people like him lived in different worlds, and a landslide might bring those worlds crashing together for a moment, but gravity always pulled them back apart. That's what Marcus told himself as he finally drifted off to sleep, his bandaged hands resting on his chest, the sound of rain still pattering against the window. He had no idea how wrong he was. The next morning arrived with weak sunlight filtering through thin curtains. Marcus woke to the smell of burning toast and found Zoe in the kitchen, standing on a chair to reach the toaster, looking guilty. "I wanted to make breakfast," she explained, pointing at the blackened bread. "Like you do for me." Marcus's heart squeezed. "How about we make it together?" They managed to produce scrambled eggs that were only slightly rubbery and toast that was mostly edible. They ate at their small table, Zoe chattering about a dream she'd had, where they lived in a big house and had a dog named Rocket, while Marcus tried to calculate how much gas it would take to get to the hospital and back. At 1:30 they climbed into the Ford. The truck protested starting as it always did, but eventually the engine turned over. Marcus had cleaned out the worst of the mud from yesterday, but the interior still smelled like wet earth and fear. The drive to Asheville Regional took 25 minutes through parts of town that got progressively nicer. The hospital itself was impressive, all glass and steel, the kind of place that probably charged $100 for an aspirin. Marcus felt acutely aware of his appearance as they walked through the automatic doors into the gleaming lobby. His jeans were clean but faded, his jacket was fraying at the cuffs, and Zoe's coat was a size too small, the sleeves riding up her wrists. A woman in an expensive navy suit was waiting near the information desk. She spotted them immediately and approached with a warm smile. "Mr. Williams, I'm Diana Torres. We spoke on the phone." Yeah." Marcus shook her hand, conscious of his bandages. "This is my daughter, Zoe." "Hello, Zoe." Diana crouched down to Zoe's level. I like your butterfly patch on your backpack. Did you pick that out yourself? Zoe nodded shyly, clutching her rolled-up drawing. Ms. Reid is expecting you. Follow me, please. Diana led them to the elevators and up to the 4th floor. The hallways were quiet with thick carpet that muffled their footsteps. This wasn't the emergency ward. This was where people with excellent insurance stayed. Room 412 was at the end of the corridor. Diana knocked gently, then opened the door. Catherine, your guests are here. The room was large and private, more like a hotel room than a hospital. Catherine Reid sat propped up in bed, her left arm in a cast from fingers to elbow, her face still bearing the cuts and bruises from yesterday, but cleaned up and bandaged properly. She wore a hospital gown, but somehow made it look dignified. Her brown eyes lit up when she saw them. Marcus, Zoe, you came. Her voice was tired but warm. We said we would, Marcus replied, feeling awkward standing in the doorway. Please come in. Diana, could you give us some privacy? Diana nodded and slipped out, closing the door behind her. Marcus and Zoe moved further into the room, and Zoe immediately held out her drawing. I made this for you, she said quietly, so you'd feel better. Catherine took the drawing with her good hand, and Marcus watched as her eyes scanned the crayon figures under their rainbow. Something shifted in her expression, a crack in the composed exterior, a glimpse of genuine emotion. This is beautiful, Zoe. Thank you. Catherine's voice was thick. I'm going to keep this forever. Really? Zoe beamed, the fear and shyness melting away. Really? In fact... Catherine reached for the call button beside her bed. A nurse appeared within seconds. Could you help me tape this to the wall where I can see it? The nurse smiled and found some medical tape, carefully securing Zoe's drawing to the wall opposite the bed. There, Catherine said, her eyes never leaving the drawing. Now I can look at it and remember that there are still people like you and your father in the world. We can't stay long, Marcus said, shifting uncomfortably. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. I'm alive because of you. Catherine gestured to the chairs beside her bed. Please sit. There are things I need to say. Reluctantly, Marcus sat and Zoe climbed into the chair beside him, swinging her legs that didn't quite reach the floor. Catherine was quiet for a moment, studying them both. When she spoke, her words were measured, deliberate. I spent all night thinking about what happened yesterday, about the choices you made. Do you know what most people would have done in your situation? Kept driving, Marcus said, like they should have. Exactly, because it would have been the rational choice, the safe choice. You had your daughter with you, Marcus, your daughter, and you still stopped. You still helped. Why? I told you yesterday, because someone needed help. That's not enough of an answer, not for what you risked. Then I don't have a better one. Marcus felt a flicker of irritation. Look, Ms. Reid. Catherine, I did what I did. You're alive. That's the end of it. We don't need... He gestured vaguely at the expensive room, at her, at everything that represented a world he didn't belong to. We don't need anything from you. What if I need something from you? The question caught Marcus off guard. What? Catherine shifted in the bed, wincing slightly. I've built an empire, Marcus. Reid Construction is worth $2 billion. I employ 3,000 people. I make decisions every day that affect countless lives. And yesterday, I was completely helpless, trapped in my car waiting to die, and I realized something. She paused, her eyes intense. I realized that for all my power, all my success, I'd forgotten what really matters. I'd forgotten what it means to put someone else first, to sacrifice, to be genuinely good. I'm sure you're a good person, Marcus said, though he had no idea if it was true. I'm an effective person. That's not the same thing. Catherine looked at Zoe, who was listening with rapt attention. When your father pulled me from that car, when he shielded both of us with his own body, He didn't do it for money or recognition, or anything he could gain. He did it because it was right. Because you were watching, and he wanted to teach you something about who he is, who you should be. "Daddy's the best," Zoe said simply. Catherine smiled. "Yes, he is, and that's why I want to help you. Not out of obligation or debt, but because I've been given a second chance and I want to use it to do something meaningful." "We don't need charity," Marcus said, his voice harder than he intended. "It's not charity. It's investment." Catherine leaned forward slightly. "Marcus, what do you do for work?" "Construction. I'm a laborer." "Do you like it?" The question was so unexpected that Marcus answered honestly. "No, but it pays the bills, mostly." "What would you do if you could do anything?" Marcus almost laughed. "That's a kid's question. I'm 40 years old with a daughter to support. What I'd like to do doesn't matter." "Humor me." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, aware of Zoe watching him, of Catherine's unwavering attention. "I used to want to be a structural engineer," he said finally, the words feeling strange on his tongue. "Before Zoe, before everything, I had 2 years of civil engineering done at UNC Asheville. I was working toward my degree, but then Sarah got pregnant and we needed money, and I took the construction job to pay the bills until I could finish school." He shrugged. "That was 11 years ago. What I wanted doesn't matter anymore." "What happened to school?" "Life happened. Sarah got sick. Zoe needed me. The job became permanent. Dreams became something other people had." Catherine nodded slowly. "What if you could finish your degree? What if you could become that engineer?" "I can't afford." "What if you could?" Catherine insisted. "What if money wasn't the obstacle?" Marcus stared at her, not understanding. "Why would you care about that?" "Because yesterday you gave me my life back, and I want to give you your dreams back, both of you." Catherine looked at Zoe. "Zoe, what do you want to be when you grow up?" Zoe thought seriously. "A veterinarian, so I can help animals feel better." "That's a wonderful goal. It takes a lot of school, though. College and veterinary school. That's expensive." Zoe's face fell slightly. "Daddy says we can't afford it, but maybe I could be something else." Marcus felt like he'd been punched. He'd never said those exact words to Zoe, but she'd absorbed the truth anyway, had learned to limit her dreams before they could break her heart. "What if you didn't have to be something else?" Catherine said gently. "What if you could be exactly what you want to be?" "Ms. Reid." "Catherine, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but we can't accept." Marcus started, but Catherine held up her good hand. "Let me finish, please." She took a breath. "I want to offer you a position with Reid Construction, not as a laborer, as a project manager in our residential development division. You'd work under our senior engineers while you finish your degree, night classes, online courses, whatever works for your schedule. We'd pay your tuition, books, everything. Starting salary is $75,000 a year, full benefits for you and Zoe." The room spun. Marcus gripped the arms of his chair. "You don't even know if I'm any good. You worked construction for 10 years and kept a dream alive in your head. That's dedication. That's passion. We can teach technical skills, Marcus. We can't teach heart." Catherine's voice was earnest now, almost pleading. "And Zoe, I want to set up an education fund for her. Full ride to whatever college she wants. Graduate school, veterinary school, law school, whatever she chooses. $500,000 held in trust until she's 18. That's too much. We can't." "Why not?" "Because people don't just do things like that. Because there has to be a catch. Some string attached. The only string is that you accept it." Catherine's eyes were bright with something that looked almost like tears. "Marcus, I'm going to be very honest with you. I almost died yesterday. I felt it coming, felt the certainty of it. And in what I thought were my last moments, my life didn't flash before my eyes. You know what I saw?" She paused. "Regret. Meetings I didn't need to take. Deals I shouldn't have made. People I'd stepped over on my way to the top. I saw a life that was successful, but not meaningful. Her voice dropped lower. And then you came. A stranger who had every reason to leave me there. And you didn't. You showed me that there's still goodness in this world. Still people who do the right thing even when it costs them everything. That's worth more than any business deal I've ever made. Daddy! Zoe's small voice cut through the tension. She was looking up at Marcus with confused hope. Does this mean I can be a veterinarian? Marcus looked at his daughter, at the possibility shining in her eyes, and felt something crack open in his chest. How many times had he lain awake at night, terrified of the day when Zoe would ask for something he couldn't give her: college opportunities, a future that wasn't limited by his bank account. And now, here it was being offered like a gift he didn't know how to accept. I need to think about this, Marcus managed. Of course. Catherine nodded. But while you think, consider this, you taught your daughter yesterday that helping others matters. That being good matters. Now, let someone help you. Let someone be good to you. Show Zoe that the world can give back too. A knock on the door interrupted them. Diana poked her head in. I'm sorry to interrupt, but the doctor is here for Catherine's pre-surgery consultation. Catherine grimaced. Already. She looked back at Marcus and Zoe. I have to deal with this, but please think about what I said. Diana will give you my private number. Call me when you're ready to talk. Or if you're never ready to talk. But please don't say no, just because it feels too good to be true. Marcus stood gently, pulling Zoe up with him. I hope the surgery goes well. Thank you, for everything. Catherine's eyes went to the drawing on the wall, to Zoe's crayon rainbow and smiling sun. Thank you for reminding me what matters. In the hallway, Diana pressed a business card into Marcus's hand, this one crisp and dry, not like the ruined one from yesterday. Her personal number was written on the back in elegant script. She means it, you know, Diana said quietly. Every word. I've worked for Catherine for 8 years, and I've never seen her like this. You changed something in her. I just pulled her out of a car, Marcus replied, feeling overwhelmed. You did more than that. But you'll figure that out eventually. The walk back to the truck felt surreal. Zoe chattered excitedly about being a veterinarian, about maybe having a dog someday, if they had more money, about all the possibilities that had suddenly bloomed in her 9-year-old imagination. Marcus just nodded, his mind spinning. He started the truck, and it coughed to life on the 3rd try. As they pulled out of the hospital parking lot, Zoe turned to him with serious eyes. Are you going to call her Daddy? I don't know, baby. Why not? She wants to help us. Because... Marcus struggled to put it into words. Because when something seems too good to be true, it usually is. And I don't want you to get your hopes up just to have them broken. Like with Mom. Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Yeah, like with Mom. Zoe was quiet for a moment. But Catherine's not Mom. And she almost died. And you saved her. And now she wants to save us back. That's different, isn't it? Out of the mouths of babes, Marcus glanced at his daughter, who somehow understood things he was still trying to figure out. Maybe it is, he admitted. So you'll think about it. Really think about it. I'll really think about it. Zoe nodded, satisfied, and went back to looking out the window at a world that suddenly seemed full of possibility. Marcus drove home through streets that looked the same, but felt different, carrying a business card in his pocket that weighed more than paper had any right to weigh, trying to figure out if he was brave enough to believe that sometimes, just sometimes, the world gave back. He didn't have the answer yet. But for the first time in 3 years, he had hope that there might be one. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He lay on the pull-out couch, staring at the ceiling, Catherine's business card on the coffee table beside him, catching slivers of moonlight that made it seem to glow in the darkness. His bandaged hands rested on his chest, and every time he shifted position, the pain reminded him that yesterday had been real. The landslide, the rescue, the woman who wanted to change his life. All of it had actually happened. The problem was that Marcus had learned not to trust good things. Good things had a way of turning into disappointments, of revealing themselves as mirages just when you got close enough to touch them. Sarah had been a good thing once. She'd smiled at him across a college classroom, and he'd believed in forever. That forever had lasted exactly 7 years before the cancer took her, leaving him with a 9-year-old daughter and a mortgage of grief he'd never finish paying. Marcus rolled onto his side, careful not to make the spring squeak and wake Zoe in the next room. Through the thin walls, he could hear Mrs. Chen's television playing too loud, and somewhere above them, the Davidsons were arguing again. The same fights, the same volume, the same cycle that never seemed to break. This was his world, thin walls and broken promises and dreams that got smaller every year until they fit inside the cramped space of survival. But what if it didn't have to be? The question kept circling back, persistent as hunger. What if Catherine Reid meant what she said? What if this wasn't a trick or a test, or some rich person's momentary guilt that would evaporate once the painkillers wore off? What if Marcus could actually finish his degree, become an engineer? Give Zoe the kind of future he'd stopped letting himself imagine. His phone buzzed on the coffee table, making him jump. The screen showed 2:47 in the morning and a text from Ray. "Hey man, you awake?" Marcus picked up the phone and typed back. "Yeah, can't sleep." "Me neither. Listen, about tomorrow Sunday. You don't have to come in if you need rest. That was some serious stuff you went through." Marcus stared at the message. Triple time. That was rent money, grocery money, the buffer that kept them from drowning. But it was also his day with Zoe. And maybe that mattered more than he'd been willing to admit. "I'll be there," Marcus typed. "Need the money." "You sure we can manage without you?" Could they? Marcus knew the crew was already stretched thin. Knew that Ray was asking because he was a good guy, not because they could actually afford to lose a body on site. And Marcus needed that paycheck. He always needed that paycheck. "I'm sure. See you at 6. "All right. Get some sleep, man. You earned it." Marcus set the phone down and closed his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, he found himself thinking about the years he'd spent hauling materials and pouring foundations, watching engineers on site with their blueprints and their vision, knowing he could do that job if someone had just given him the chance. He'd drawn up plans in his head while mixing concrete, had redesigned buildings in his imagination, while his hands did the mindless work his body had learned to perform on autopilot. What did Catherine see when she looked at him? A hero. A project. Or maybe she saw what he'd stopped letting himself see. Potential that hadn't died, just gone dormant, waiting for someone to water it back to life. The sun came up too fast, bleeding orange light through the thin curtains. Marcus forced himself off the couch and into the shower, letting lukewarm water wash away the exhaustion he could feel in his bones. His hands were healing, but still tender, the bandages needing to be changed. He unwrapped them carefully and studied the cuts that crisscrossed his palms, evidence of metal and desperation, of a choice that had cost him something but given him something too, though he still wasn't sure what. Zoe was already awake when he emerged, sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal and a serious expression that reminded him too much of himself. "You didn't sleep," she said. Not a question. "How do you know?" "I heard you moving around, and you've got the thinking face." "The thinking face?" "The one where your eyebrows scrunch up, and you look like you're trying to solve the world's hardest math problem." Zoe took a bite of cereal. "Are you thinking about what Catherine said?" Marcus poured himself coffee that was more necessity than pleasure. "Among other things." "I think we should say yes." "It's not that simple, Zoe." "Why not?" She set down her spoon and looked at him with those eyes that saw too much. "Is it because of Mom? Because you're scared someone else will promise stuff and then leave?" Marcus felt like he'd been hit. How did she know? How could a 9-year-old possibly understand the geography of his fear that well? I'm scared too. Zoe continued, her voice small but steady. I'm scared that if we say yes and it goes away, it'll hurt worse than if we just said no from the beginning. But Dad, what if it doesn't go away? What if it's real and we miss it because we were too scared to try? Marcus sat down across from her, this small person who'd somehow become wiser than he was. When did you get so smart? I learned it from you. You were scared yesterday when you ran to help Catherine. I saw your face. But you did it anyway, because it was right. Zoe reached across the table and put her small hand over his bandaged one. Maybe this is like that. Maybe it's scary but right. Marcus covered her hand with his other one, careful of the cuts. You know I have to work today, right? Sunday shift. Zoe's face fell slightly, but she nodded. Triple time, I know. Mrs. Chen said she'd watch me. Mrs. Chen smells like mothballs and makes you eat vegetables. Despite everything, Zoe smiled. That's what makes her a good babysitter. Responsible. Marcus laughed, and it felt good, like pressure releasing. Go get dressed. I'll drop you off on my way. At 5:30, Marcus knocked on Mrs. Chen's door. The elderly woman answered in her bathrobe, her gray hair in curlers, but she smiled warmly when she saw Zoe. Come in, sweet girl. We make spring rolls today. Really? Zoe brightened, despite her earlier disappointment. Can I help? Of course. My grandmother's recipe. Very special. Mrs. Chen looked at Marcus. You go work hard. Zoe is safe with me. Thank you, Mrs. Chen. I'll be back around 6 tonight. No rush. We have spring rolls. We have movies. We have fun. Marcus kissed Zoe's forehead and headed out into the early morning cold. The construction site was 40 minutes away across town, in the new development that was slowly transforming farmland into subdivisions. He arrived at 5:55 just as Ray was opening the equipment shed. You made it, Ray said, looking Marcus over with concern. How are the hands? Fine, ready to work. We're pouring the foundation for lots 12 and 13 today. You up for it? Pouring foundation was grueling work, mixing concrete, hauling it in wheelbarrows, spreading it smooth before it set. It would destroy Marcus's healing hands, would leave him barely able to move by the end of the day. But it was triple time, and triple time meant options. I'm up for it. The crew assembled as the sun climbed higher, 8 men who'd all given up their Sunday for the same reason Marcus had. They needed the money. They all needed the money. And that need bound them together in a way that conversation never could. The work was exactly as brutal as Marcus expected. Within an hour, his hands were screaming protest through the bandages. By noon, blood had seeped through the gauze, turning the white fabric pink. Ray noticed and tried to pull Marcus off the heavy work, but Marcus waved him off. He'd committed to being here, and he'd see it through. During the lunch break, Marcus sat in the shade of an unfinished house and stared at his phone. Catherine's business card was in his wallet, her private number memorized, though he hadn't consciously tried to learn it. His thumb hovered over the keypad, but he couldn't make himself dial. What would he even say? Thank you, but no. Yes, but I'm terrified. Help me understand why you're doing this. You going to call someone or just stare at that thing? Danny. One of the other laborers dropped down beside him with a grunt. He was older than Marcus by a decade, with a wife and 3 kids, and a resignation in his eyes that spoke of dreams long since abandoned. Just thinking. Dangerous pastime. Danny unwrapped a sandwich that had seen better days. You hear about Jenkins? What about him? Got laid off Friday. Client cut the budget and Jenkins was last hired. Got a new baby at home too. Danny shook his head. This business, one day you're making money, next day you're scrambling for unemployment. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. That could be him. One budget cut, one client decision, and he'd be back to scraping by on whatever odd jobs he could find with Zoe, depending on an income that could vanish like morning fog. That's rough, Marcus said. That's life. Danny took a bite of his sandwich and chewed slowly. You know what I'd do if I could do anything? I'd go back to school, finish my degree in mechanical engineering. But that ship sailed 15 years ago, and now I'm here until my body gives out or they decide they don't need me anymore. Marcus looked at Danny, really looked at him, and saw his own future written in the lines around the older man's eyes and the way his shoulders curved inward like he was protecting himself from blows that never stopped coming. This was what happened when you gave up on dreams. You didn't die dramatically. You just faded slowly year by year until you couldn't remember what you'd wanted to be before survival became the only goal. What if you could go back? Marcus heard himself ask. What if someone offered you that chance? Danny laughed, but it was a hollow sound. People like us don't get second chances, Marcus. We get work and bills and the hope that we can keep our heads above water long enough to see our kids do better than we did. The rest is fairy tales. The rest of the day passed in a blur of concrete and pain. By the time 6 o'clock rolled around, Marcus could barely grip the steering wheel of his truck. His hands were a disaster, the bandages soaked through, and he knew he'd have to clean and redress the wounds before Zoe saw them. The last thing he wanted was for her to worry more than she already did. He stopped at a gas station and bought new bandages with the last of his cash, then spent 10 minutes in the bathroom cleaning his hands and wrapping them in fresh gauze. The cuts were angry and red, probably getting infected. Definitely not healing the way they should be. But they'd heal eventually. They always did. Mrs. Chen's apartment smelled like ginger and sesame oil when Marcus knocked at 6:15. Zoe threw open the door, her face flushed with excitement. Daddy, we made 32 spring rolls and I only broke 3, and Mrs. Chen says I'm a natural cook. That's wonderful, sweetheart. Marcus looked past Zoe to where Mrs. Chen was wiping down her kitchen counter. Thank you so much for watching her. Is no problem. She is good girl. Mrs. Chen handed Marcus a plastic container. Spring rolls for your dinner. You both eat. Get strong. You didn't have to. I know. I want to. Mrs. Chen patted his arm, her eyes knowing, seeing things Marcus wished she couldn't see. You are good man, Marcus Williams. You deserve good things. Don't forget that. Back in their apartment, Zoe set the table while Marcus tried to figure out how to open the spring roll container with his ruined hands. Zoe noticed immediately. Dad, your hands are worse. They're fine. Just a long day. They're bleeding through the bandages. Zoe's voice went high with worry. You should go to the doctor. Doctors cost money we don't have. They'll heal. But what if they don't? What if they get infected and you get really sick and... Zoe? Marcus caught her shoulders gently. I'm okay. I promise. There was that word again. But this time, Marcus wasn't sure he could keep it. His hands were a mess. His body was exhausted, and the weight of everything yesterday's rescue. Catherine's offer, the choice he still hadn't made, was crushing down on him like the landslide that had almost killed them both. They ate Mrs. Chen's spring rolls in silence, Zoe watching him with worried eyes while Marcus tried to pretend everything was normal. But nothing was normal anymore. Normal had ended the moment he'd pulled over on that rain-soaked road and seen a stranger dying in twisted metal. After dinner, Zoe cleared the table without being asked, then came back and stood in front of Marcus with her arms crossed, a tiny determined figure who looked so much like her mother, it hurt. We need to talk about Catherine, she announced. We do, Marcus agreed. I've been thinking about it all day while we made spring rolls and watched movies and everything. And I think you're scared for the wrong reasons. Oh. Marcus couldn't help but smile slightly. What are the right reasons to be scared? You should be scared that we'll say no and miss our chance. Not that we'll say yes and it won't work out. Zoe climbed into his lap, careful of his hands, and looked up at him with absolute conviction. What if this is God giving us something good because we were good first? What if you saved Catherine so she could save us? The world doesn't work like that, baby. How do you know maybe it does and you just never noticed because you were too busy being sad about mom and working too hard and trying to make everything okay all by yourself? Zoe's voice softened. You're allowed to let someone help us, Dad. You're allowed to say yes to good things. Marcus felt something crack in his chest, some wall he'd built to keep hope out, because hope hurt too much when it died. What if I say yes and mess it up? What if I'm not smart enough anymore, or I can't do the work, or... Then you'll try anyway, because that's what you taught me. You try even when you're scared. Zoe pressed her small hand against his cheek. Please, Daddy. Can we just try? Marcus looked at his daughter, this 9-year-old miracle who somehow understood life better than he did, and felt the last of his resistance crumble. She was right. Danny was right. Even Mrs. Chen was right. He deserved good things. And more importantly, Zoe deserved them. She deserved a father who wasn't too afraid to reach for possibility when it was offered with both hands. Okay, Marcus whispered. Okay, we'll try. Zoe's face lit up like sunrise. Really? You mean it? I mean it. Tomorrow I'll call Catherine and tell her yes. Zoe threw her arms around his neck, squeezing so tight Marcus could barely breathe. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank me when it works out, Marcus said, but he was smiling, feeling something unfamiliar and fragile taking root in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize it. Hope. That night, after Zoe had gone to bed still buzzing with excitement, Marcus sat on the couch with Catherine's business card in his bandaged hands. The numbers seemed to swim in his tired vision, but he'd made a promise to Zoe, and Marcus Williams kept his promises. Before he could talk himself out of it, he dialed. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Marcus. Catherine. I hope it's not too late to call. It's never too late. He could hear the smile in her voice, and something else, anticipation maybe, or relief. How did the surgery go? They pinned my wrist back together with what feels like half a hardware store. I'll be in this cast for 8 weeks, but they say I'll make a full recovery. She paused. Have you thought about my offer? Marcus took a breath. I have, and I want to accept, if it's still on the table. The silence on the other end lasted just long enough to make Marcus's heart sink. Then Catherine laughed, a sound full of genuine joy. Oh, Marcus, you have no idea how much I was hoping you'd say that. I need you to understand something first. I'm not looking for charity. I'll work for this whatever it takes. And if I can't cut it, if I'm not good enough. You're good enough, Catherine interrupted firmly. But I appreciate your honesty. Here's how we'll structure it. You'll start as a project manager trainee in our residential development division on Monday. The salary is $75,000 a year to start with full benefits, including health insurance for you and Zoe. Marcus's breath caught. $75,000 was more than double what he made in construction, and that was with all the overtime he regularly pulled. You'll work 40 hours a week, no more, no less, Catherine continued. I don't believe in burning people out. We'll enroll you in online classes at UNC Asheville to finish your civil engineering degree. The company pays tuition, books, everything. It'll take about 2 years at the pace we're planning. After that, we'll reassess your position and salary. Catherine, I don't know what to say. Say you'll show up Monday morning at 8. Diana will email you all the details tonight, where to go, who to meet with, dress code, all of it. And Marcus. Her voice softened. Don't be nervous. You saved my life. Learning structural engineering is easy compared to that. What about Zoe's education fund? Already set up. $500,000 in a trust that she can access for any accredited educational institution, undergraduate, graduate, medical school, veterinary school, whatever she chooses. The only restriction is that it has to be used for education. Marcus's vision blurred. $500,000 for Zoe. For veterinary school or medical school or whatever dream she decided to chase. His little girl would never have to limit her possibilities the way he had. I don't know how to thank you, Marcus managed. Thank me by being the engineer I know you can be. Thank me by showing Zoe that good things do happen. Thank me by living the life you deserve." Catherine paused. "You gave me a second chance, Marcus. Let me give you one too." After they hung up, Marcus sat in the darkness of his small apartment, feeling the weight of possibility settle over him like a blanket. Tomorrow, he'd have to give notice at the construction site. Tomorrow, he'd have to tell Zoe that her dream of veterinary school wasn't just a dream anymore. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight, right now, Marcus let himself feel something he hadn't felt in years. Gratitude for the choice he'd made on that rain-soaked road. Gratitude for the stranger who'd become something more. Gratitude for the daughter who'd pushed him to say yes when every instinct told him to run away. He looked at his bandaged hands and thought about what they'd done, what they'd lost, what they'd gained. These were the hands that had torn metal and shielded bodies and refused to let go when holding on seemed impossible. These were hands that had built things for other people's dreams. And now, finally, they'd get to build something for his own. Marcus pulled out his phone and texted Ray. "Need to talk to you tomorrow before shift. Something's come up." The response came quickly. "Everything okay?" Marcus smiled at the phone at the question that used to only have one answer. "Yeah," he typed back. "Everything's going to be okay." He went to Zoe's room and stood in the doorway, watching her sleep with Mr. Bear clutched in her arms, her face peaceful in a way that made his heart ache with love. This was why he'd done it. This was why he'd stopped. Not for gratitude or reward or any of the things that had come after, but for this small person who believed in rainbows and smiling suns, and fathers who kept their promises. "We're going to be okay, Zoe," Marcus whispered into the darkness. "I promise." And this time, he believed it. The night passed slowly. Sleep coming in fits and starts as Marcus's mind raced through everything that would happen in the coming days. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw blueprints and buildings, classrooms, and possibilities that had seemed as distant as stars, but were suddenly close enough to touch. At some point near dawn, he must have fallen asleep because he woke to Zoe shaking his shoulder, her face bright with morning light and excitement. "Dad, is it true? Did you really call her?" Marcus blinked away the grogginess and smiled at his daughter. "I really called her. It's happening, Zoe, all of it." Zoe launched herself at him, and Marcus caught her despite the protest from his healing hands holding her tight, while she laughed and cried at the same time. "You're going to be amazing," she said fiercely. "You're going to be the best engineer ever." "We'll see about that, but I'm going to try. That's all that matters." Zoe pulled back and looked at him seriously. "When do you start?" "Monday, which means I need to give notice at the site today." "Are you sad about leaving?" Marcus thought about Danny and Ray and the other men who'd become something like friends over the years. He'd miss them, but he wouldn't miss the work, the constant fear of injury, or lay off the knowledge that his body was slowly breaking down from labor. It wasn't meant to sustain forever. "No, baby, I'm not sad. I'm ready for something different, something better." At 9 in the morning, Marcus called Ray. "Hey, I need to give my notice. Today's my last day." There was a pause. "You serious? You get a better offer." "Something like that. I'm sorry for the short notice, but..." "Don't apologize, man. If you got something better, you take it. Lord knows we could all use a break." Ray's voice was warm despite his words. "You're a good worker, Marcus. Best of luck with whatever you're doing next." "Thanks, Ray, for everything." After he hung up, Marcus felt a strange sensation, like he was standing on the edge of something vast, looking out at a horizon that had been hidden behind walls of his own making. Fear was still there, crouching in the corners of his mind, whispering about failure and inadequacy and all the ways this could go wrong. But for the first time in years, hope was louder. Zoe appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas, holding Mr. Bear. "What happens now, Dad?" Marcus smiled at her. Now we figure out how to be the people we always wanted to be." "I already know who I want to be. A veterinarian who helps animals." "Then that's who you'll be." Marcus opened his arms and Zoe ran into them. "No limits anymore, Zoe. You dream as big as you want. What about you? What's your big dream? Marcus thought about the question, about all the years he'd spent pushing dreams down until they fit in the cracks between survival and exhaustion. I want to design buildings that make people feel something, places where families live and grow and make memories. I want to create spaces that matter. You'll be amazing at that, Zoe said with absolute conviction, because you already know how to make spaces that matter. You did it here with just us and this tiny apartment. Marcus felt tears sting his eyes. When did you get so wise? I learned it from you. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Marcus dug through his closet looking for clothes that might work for an office job, realizing most of what he owned was stained with worksite dirt or had holes worn through from years of use. Zoe insisted they go shopping, and though Marcus protested about the expense, she reminded him that he had a new job starting Monday with a salary that meant they could afford things like dress pants that actually fit. At the department store, Zoe helped Marcus pick out 2 pairs of slacks, 3 button-down shirts, and a tie that wasn't too formal but wasn't too casual either. In the fitting room, Marcus stared at his reflection and barely recognized himself. The man looking back looked professional, capable like someone who belonged in an office designing buildings instead of pouring their foundations. You look handsome, Dad, Zoe said when he emerged. Like a real engineer. I'm not one yet. But you will be, and you look like you already are. They bought the clothes, and Marcus tried not to wince at the total, reminding himself that this was an investment, that everything was different now. On the way home, they stopped at Zoe's favorite ice cream shop, a rare treat that felt appropriate for a day when their entire world had shifted on its axis. Sitting at a small table with their cones dripping in the afternoon heat, Zoe looked at Marcus with serious eyes. Are you still scared? Terrified, Marcus admitted. Me too. But it's the good kind of scared. The kind that means something important is happening. When did you learn about good scared versus bad scared? Mrs. Chen told me. She said bad scared makes you small, but good scared makes you brave. Zoe licked her ice cream thoughtfully. I think we're being brave. I think you're right. That night, Marcus helped Zoe pick out her outfit for school the next day, and she helped him lay out his new work clothes for Monday morning. They moved around their small apartment like choreographers planning a dance, each step deliberate and full of meaning. Before bed, Zoe asked Marcus to read her favorite story, the one about the little train that could. It was a children's book she'd outgrown years ago, but tonight it felt appropriate, this tale of believing in yourself even when the hill looked too steep to climb. I think I can. Marcus read, his voice steady, despite the emotion building in his chest. We know we can, Zoe whispered, snuggling into her pillow. Marcus kissed her forehead and stood to leave, but Zoe's voice stopped him. Dad, thank you for saying yes. Thank you for being brave. Thank you for pushing me to be, Marcus replied. I love you, Zoe. More than anything in this world. Love you too. Now go get some sleep. You've got a big day Monday. Marcus returned to the living room and his pull-out couch, but instead of lying down, he sat at their small kitchen table with a notebook and pencil. His hands still ached, but he needed to do this, needed to remember what it felt like to create something from nothing. He started sketching rough lines at first, then more detailed. A house took shape on the page. Nothing fancy but solid and warm, with big windows that let in light and a porch where families could sit together in the evenings. It wasn't much just a dream on paper, but it was his dream. And for the first time in 10 years, Marcus let himself believe that dreams could become blueprints, could become reality. The sketch was still unfinished when exhaustion finally pulled him towards sleep, but Marcus left it on the table where he'd see it in the morning, a reminder of who he used to be and who he was becoming. As he finally stretched out on the couch and closed his eyes, Marcus's last thought wasn't about fear or failure, or all the ways this could go wrong. Instead, he thought about Catherine's words. You gave me a second chance. Let me give you one too. Second chances. Maybe they were real. Maybe sometimes the world did give back what it had taken if you were brave enough to reach out and grab it with both hands, even when those hands were scarred and bandaged and trembling with uncertainty. Marcus slept deeply that night, dreaming of buildings that reached toward the sky, and daughters who became veterinarians, and futures that looked nothing like the past that had tried to define him. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel possible. Marcus stood in front of the bathroom mirror at 6:30, trying to knot his new tie for the fourth time. His bandaged hands made the simple task frustratingly complex, and the YouTube tutorial playing on his phone wasn't helping as much as he'd hoped. "Dad, you're going to be late if you keep doing that," Zoe called from the kitchen where she was eating cereal and packing her school bag. "I almost have it," Marcus muttered, watching the tie slip through his fingers again. Zoe appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas, and sighed with the exasperation only a 9-year-old could muster. "Let me help. You know how to tie a tie." "Mrs. Chen showed me on YouTube yesterday. She said you'd probably need help." Zoe climbed onto the toilet seat to reach his collar, and with surprising deftness, created a perfect Windsor knot. "There. Now you look like a real engineer." Marcus stared at his reflection. The man looking back wore pressed slacks, a crisp blue shirt, and a tie that didn't hang crooked. His hair was combed, his face clean-shaven, and if he didn't look too closely at the uncertainty in his eyes, he almost believed he belonged in this new skin. "What if I'm not good enough?" The words escaped before Marcus could stop them. This confession of fear to a child who shouldn't have to carry it. Zoe's hands rested on his shoulders, her reflection meeting his in the mirror. "You pulled a person out of a crushed car while a mountain was falling on you. I think you can handle drawing buildings." Marcus turned and hugged her, careful not to wrinkle his new shirt. "When did you become the parent?" "Someone has to be the smart one in this family." Zoe grinned and hopped down from the toilet. "Now go. Mrs. Chen's taking me to school, and you need to get to Reid Construction before you're late on your first day." The drive to Reid Construction took Marcus through parts of the city he rarely visited, where buildings were made of glass and steel instead of worn brick, where people walked with purpose in expensive suits, carrying briefcases and cups of coffee that probably cost more than Marcus used to make in an hour. The company's headquarters was a sleek tower that seemed to touch the clouds, all modern architecture and intimidating grandeur. Marcus's Ford looked embarrassingly out of place in the underground parking garage among the BMWs and Mercedes. He found a spot in the farthest corner as if distance might somehow hide his truck's age and rust spots, then sat for a moment with his hands on the steering wheel, trying to calm the racing of his heart. This was it. The moment where he either proved he belonged or confirmed every fear that whispered he was nothing more than a construction worker playing dress-up. Diana Torres was waiting in the lobby when Marcus entered, her smile warm and welcoming, despite the corporate surroundings. "Marcus, perfect timing. How are you feeling?" "Terrified," Marcus admitted. "Good. That means you care." Diana gestured toward the elevators. "Come on, I'll give you the tour and introduce you to the team. Catherine wanted to be here herself, but she's stuck in back-to-back meetings. She says to tell you good luck and that she's pulling for you." The elevator ride to the 12th floor felt like ascending to another world. Diana kept up a steady stream of information: where the cafeteria was, how the badge system worked, what the dress code actually meant versus what HR said it meant. Marcus tried to absorb it all, but his mind kept sticking on one thought: Catherine believed in him. That had to count for something. The residential development division occupied the entire 12th floor, an open concept space filled with drafting tables, computer stations, and windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. Engineers and designers moved between workstations, their conversations peppered with technical terms Marcus half remembered from his college days. "This is your desk," Diana said, stopping at a station near the windows. It was equipped with a top-of-the-line computer design software Marcus had only heard about and supplies that looked untouched and expensive. "Your supervisor is Jim Halloran. He's brilliant, a bit no-nonsense but fair. He'll be your mentor as you learn the ropes. When does he? Right now, actually. Diana nodded toward a man approaching them, probably in his mid-50s with sharp eyes and the kind of posture that suggested decades of knowing exactly what he was doing. Marcus Williams. Jim extended his hand, and his grip was firm, but not aggressive. Jim Halloran, welcome to the team. Thank you for having me, Marcus said, hyper-aware of how formal he sounded, how out of place he felt. Diana's given you the basics. When Marcus nodded, Jim continued. Good. Let's talk about what you'll actually be doing here. Catherine told me your background: 2 years of civil engineering, nearly a decade in construction. That's actually a valuable combination. You understand how buildings go together in practice, not just theory. I hope so. We'll find out soon enough. Jim gestured for Marcus to follow him to a conference room. Your first project is modest by our standards, but it'll test your fundamentals. We're designing a community center for a nonprofit in the Riverside district. Nothing fancy, but it needs to be functional, welcoming, and built on a tight budget. Sound manageable? Marcus thought about the sketches he'd done over the years in his head, the buildings he'd imagined, while his hands did mindless work. I'd like to try. Good answer. Not yes with false confidence, but I'd like to try with honest uncertainty. I can work with that. Jim pulled up blueprints on a large monitor. This is what the previous designer started before moving to another project. Basic structure, nothing inspired. I want you to look at it, really look at it, and tell me what's wrong. What would make this building better? What would make it matter? Marcus studied the blueprints, and slowly his construction experience began speaking to him in ways his rusty engineering knowledge couldn't. The main entrance faces north. In this climate, that means anyone waiting to get in during winter will be hit with the worst wind. What else? The community room is too far from the kitchen. Makes no sense if they're hosting events. Marcus pointed to another section. And there's no natural light in the children's area. Kids need sunlight, need to see outside. This would feel like a basement. Keep going. These support columns, they're going to create blind spots in the main hall. Dangerous if you've got kids running around. And the bathroom placement means people have to walk through the entire building. In an emergency, that's a problem. Jim was quiet for a moment, studying Marcus with an intensity that made him wonder if he'd said something wrong. Then, a slow smile spread across his supervisor's face. You see it. The practical stuff, the human stuff. Half the engineers here design beautiful buildings that don't work for the people who will actually use them. You're thinking about the users first. Is that good? It's exactly what we need. Jim closed the blueprints and leaned back in his chair. Here's how this works. You're going to redesign this community center from the ground up. I'll check in daily, guide you through the technical aspects, help you remember what you learned in school. But the vision, that's yours. Show me what you can do. Marcus felt something ignite in his chest, a spark that had been dormant so long he'd forgotten it existed. When do I start? Right now. Jim stood and opened the conference room door. Your desk has everything you need. Don't be afraid to ask questions. There are no stupid ones, only expensive mistakes we make by not asking. And Marcus... Jim paused at the doorway. Catherine doesn't make decisions lightly. If she believes in you, there's a reason. Now prove her right. The first hours at his new desk were overwhelming. The design software was more advanced than anything Marcus had used in college, and his fingers fumbled over commands that should have been intuitive. Twice he nearly erased hours of work, saved only by a coworker named Rachel, who noticed his panic and calmly walked him through the recovery process. Everyone struggles at first, Rachel said, perching on the edge of his desk. She was in her late 20s with bright red glasses and the kind of casual confidence Marcus envied. I spent my first week accidentally creating buildings that defied physics. You're doing fine. I'm barely keeping up. Neither was I. Neither is anyone on their first day. Rachel glanced at his screen where Marcus had been attempting to sketch the basic outline of the community center. But that entrance repositioning, that's smart. Jim's going to love it. By lunch, Marcus had managed to create a rough floor plan that repositioned the entrance to face south, moved the community room adjacent to the kitchen, and added windows to the children's area that would flood it with natural light. It wasn't beautiful yet, wasn't refined, but it was functional in ways the original design hadn't been. Marcus was so absorbed in adjusting the support columns when his phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. "How's it going? Are you an engineer yet?" He smiled and typed back. "Getting there. How's school?" "Boring. But I told everyone my dad is designing buildings now, and Miss Peterson said that's a noble profession." "What's noble mean?" "It means important and good." "Then she's right. Love you. Don't forget to eat lunch." Marcus looked at the clock and realized it was past 1. He'd been so focused he'd forgotten about food entirely, forgotten about time, forgotten about everything except the building taking shape on his screen. When was the last time work had felt like this, engaging instead of exhausting, creative instead of repetitive? The cafeteria on the 15th floor was nothing like the food trucks Marcus was used to at construction sites. There were salad bars and hot meals, a sushi station, and a grill, all subsidized by the company. Marcus grabbed a sandwich and found a table by the windows looking out over the city, while his mind continued working through design problems. "Mind if I join you?" Marcus looked up to see Reid standing with a tray, her arm still in its cast, but looking otherwise recovered. She wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than Marcus's truck, but her smile was genuine, almost shy. "Of course." Marcus gestured to the empty chair. Catherine sat down carefully, maneuvering her cast. "I've been in meetings all morning, or I would have come to see you earlier. How's it going? Is Jim treating you well?" "He's intense, but good. Gave me a project to redesign the community center." "The Riverside project." Catherine picked at her salad with her good hand. "I may have suggested that one specifically. It's important work, Marcus. That neighborhood needs something positive, something that shows people they matter." "That's what I'm trying to do. Make it matter." Catherine looked at him for a long moment, something complicated passing across her face. "Can I tell you something? Something I haven't told anyone else?" Marcus nodded, uncertain where this was going. "When I was trapped in that car when I thought I was going to die, I didn't see my life flash before my eyes. I saw all the things I hadn't done, all the people I'd been too busy to help, all the projects I'd rejected because they weren't profitable enough." Catherine's voice was quiet, almost confessional. "I built an empire, Marcus, but I didn't build anything that mattered. Not really. Not the way your community center is going to matter. You help people. Your company employs thousands. I employ people so they can make me richer. That's not the same thing as helping them." Catherine set down her fork. "But you help because it's right. You stopped for me because someone needed you, not because there was something in it for you. That's what I want to remember, what I want to become. Someone who does things because they matter, not because they profit." Marcus didn't know what to say. This powerful woman who commanded boardrooms and made million-dollar decisions seemed almost fragile in this moment, as if the landslide had cracked something open inside her that money couldn't fix. "I think you're being too hard on yourself," Marcus said finally. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm finally being honest." Catherine managed a small smile. "Thank you for saying yes, Marcus. For trusting me. I know it wasn't easy. Zoe pushed me. Said I was being scared for the wrong reasons. Smart kid. Smarter than me, that's for sure." They finished lunch, talking about lighter things, Zoe's school, Catherine's physical therapy, the challenge of learning to write left-handed. But underneath the casual conversation, Marcus felt the weight of what Catherine had shared, this glimpse into the hollowness that success could create when it wasn't built on foundations that mattered. The afternoon passed in a blur of design work. Jim checked in twice, offering suggestions that were actually helpful rather than condescending, praising the choices Marcus made, even as he gently corrected the technical errors. By 5 o'clock, Marcus had a preliminary design that felt solid, a building that would serve its community rather than just occupy space. "Go home," Jim said, appearing at Marcus's desk as other employees began packing up. "Day one is done. You did good work. I could stay refine some of the—" "Go home to your daughter. The building will still be here tomorrow." Jim's expression softened slightly. "This job requires passion, Marcus, but it also requires balance. Don't lose yourself in the work. Trust me, I learned that lesson the hard way." Marcus saved his files and shut down his computer, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. His hands ached from the unfamiliar keyboard work. His eyes burned from staring at the screen, but his mind was alive in a way it hadn't been in years. Zoe was waiting when Marcus got home, practically vibrating with excitement. Mrs. Chen had let her in and was cooking something that smelled amazing in their small kitchen. "Dad, tell me everything." Marcus scooped her up, spinning her around the way he used to when she was smaller. "I designed a building today. Well, started designing one. A community center. For real, like people will actually use it. If we do it right, yeah." Zoe squealed and hugged him tighter. "I told everyone you were an engineer now. Was I right? Are you—" Marcus thought about the question. Was he an engineer? He had a job at an engineering firm, was designing a building, was being paid to do creative work. But more than that, he was doing what he'd always wanted to do, was using his mind in ways that felt right and true. "Yeah, Em. I think I am." Mrs. Chen emerged from the kitchen with a knowing smile. "I make celebration dinner. Chicken adobo, and rice and vegetables. You won't complain about, young lady." "I wasn't going to complain," Zoe protested, though her grin suggested otherwise. They ate together, the three of them crowded around Marcus's small table, and for the first time in years, the apartment didn't feel too small or too shabby. It felt like home, like possibility, like the beginning of something that could be beautiful if they were brave enough to build it. After Mrs. Chen left and Zoe was in bed, Marcus returned to the kitchen table with his notebook. The sketch he'd started days ago was still there, that simple house with the big windows and welcoming porch. But now he saw it differently. Saw the technical challenges and solutions, saw how to make the dream structural and sound. He started redrawing it, applying what he'd remembered and relearned today. And the house on the page began to look less like fantasy and more like something that could exist in the real world. His phone buzzed with an email from Jim. "Preliminary design looks strong. Tomorrow we'll work on structural calculations and building codes. Get some rest." Marcus smiled at the message, at this new reality, where he had a supervisor who respected him, colleagues who helped him work, that engaged his mind and soul. He responded with a simple thank you and closed his laptop. The week that followed was intense, but rewarding. Marcus arrived early each morning, his tie now something Zoe helped him with while they ate breakfast together, a ritual they'd developed. He spent his days learning and relearning, making mistakes and fixing them slowly, building confidence alongside the community center that was taking shape in his designs. Jim was a patient teacher, explaining building codes Marcus had forgotten, and structural principles he'd never learned properly. Rachel became a friend, sharing shortcuts and laughing when Marcus accidentally created impossible angles or forgot to account for gravity. The other engineers welcomed him gradually, recognizing that his practical construction knowledge made him valuable even as he struggled with the theoretical aspects. On Thursday, Catherine stopped by his desk with Diana trailing behind. "How's our community center coming along?" Marcus pulled up his latest design on the screen. "The main structure is solid. I've added covered outdoor spaces for events, maximized natural light, and created separate zones for different age groups while keeping sight lines open for supervision." Catherine studied the screen, her good hand tracing the lines of his design. "Marcus, this is beautiful. And I don't mean aesthetically, though it is. I mean it's beautiful in purpose. You've created something that will actually serve people." That was the goal. "Can I show you something?" Catherine gestured for Marcus to follow her to the conference room. Once inside with the door closed, she pulled up another set of blueprints on the monitor. This is a project we're bidding on a mixed-income housing development. The current design is efficient but soulless. What do you see? Marcus studied the plans, his construction experience, and developing engineering eye working together. It's too uniform. Makes it obvious which units are subsidized and which are market rate. Creates division before people even move in. Exactly what I thought. What would you do differently? Vary the facades. Mix the unit types throughout the building. Make it impossible to tell from the outside who's paying what. Add shared spaces that encourage interaction. Community gardens, playgrounds, common rooms. Make it feel like a neighborhood, not a project. Catherine was smiling now, that same expression she'd worn in the hospital when Zoe gave her the drawing. I want you on this project. Not as a trainee, as a junior engineer. Marcus's heart stuttered. Catherine, I've been here less than a week. I don't have my degree yet. I'm still learning the software. You have something more important than any of that. You understand what it means to struggle to need affordable housing, to want dignity along with a roof over your head. Catherine leaned against the conference table. The lead engineer is Thomas Wellington. He's brilliant with structure but terrible with human elements. You'd balance him out. And Jim says you're ready for more responsibility. He said that. He said you're raw but talented, practical but creative. He said you see buildings the way they should be seen, as spaces for people, not just problems to solve. Catherine's eyes were intense. This is a big opportunity, Marcus. Bigger than the community center. Are you ready for it? Marcus thought about Zoe, about the promise he'd made to try to be brave, even when fear screamed at him to play it safe. I'd like to try. Same answer as your first day. I'm starting to think that's your superpower, honest uncertainty, instead of false confidence. Catherine extended her good hand. Welcome to the Wellington Project. We pitch in 3 weeks. Think you can have ideas ready by then? Marcus shook her hand, feeling the weight of trust she was placing in him. I'll have something ready. That evening, Marcus came home to find Zoe and Mrs. Chen making chocolate chip cookies. The apartment filled with the smell of sugar and possibility. Zoe's hands were covered in flour, and she had a smudge of dough on her cheek that made her look younger than 9. Dad, you're late? We saved you cookie dough to taste. Zoe rushed over, forgetting about her floury hands, until she'd already grabbed his shirt. Marcus laughed and hugged her anyway, flour and all. Sorry, got caught up at work. But I have news, I got assigned to a bigger project, much bigger. Apartment buildings for families who need affordable places to live. Zoe's eyes went wide. Like us, like we used to need, exactly like us. Mrs. Chen handed Marcus a warm cookie from the first batch. You help people now like you always do, but bigger. Is good. Is very good. Marcus bit into the cookie and thought about what Mrs. Chen said. He was helping people, but not the way he'd helped Catherine, not with his hands and immediate action, but with his mind and vision and understanding of what people needed when they came home at night. Different kind of help, maybe even more lasting. Zoe climbed onto his lap, still covered in flour, but not caring. Are you happy, Dad? Like really happy? Marcus considered the question. Was he happy? The work was challenging, sometimes overwhelming. He still struggled with the software, still felt like an imposter when he sat in meetings with engineers who had decades of experience. But underneath the stress and uncertainty was something he hadn't felt in years: purpose, meaning the sense that what he did each day mattered beyond a paycheck. Yeah, Em. I think I am. Good, because you deserve to be happy. Mrs. Chen says so, and she's always right. Mrs. Chen is very wise. Marcus agreed, making the elderly woman blush. They spent the evening eating too many cookies and watching Zoe's favorite movie, the one about the girl who built a robot to save her town. Marcus had seen it dozens of times, but tonight he noticed something new. The way the girl didn't let anyone tell her what was impossible, the way she built her dream piece by piece, even when everyone said it couldn't be done. After Zoe was asleep, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with his notebook and started sketching ideas for the housing development. He thought about all the apartments he'd lived in over the years, the ones with thin walls and broken heating, and landlords who didn't care. He thought about what he'd wanted those places to be, what would have made them feel like homes, instead of just spaces to survive. His pencil moved across the page, creating buildings that were beautiful but practical, that had community spaces and green areas and places where kids could play safely. He designed units with good natural light, with layouts that made small spaces feel larger, with details that showed residents they were valued. It was past midnight when Marcus finally stopped sketching, his hands cramping, but his mind still racing with ideas. He took photos of his drawings with his phone and emailed them to himself so he could refine them tomorrow using the proper software. As he settled onto the pull-out couch, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Heard you're working late? Don't burn yourself out. The buildings will still be there tomorrow. Take care of yourself and Zoe. That's an order from the boss." Marcus smiled and typed back, "Yes, ma'am. See you tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Catherine replied, "when you'll continue to amaze us all." The next 2 weeks blurred together in a rush of work and learning. Marcus's community center design was approved by Jim and sent to the nonprofit, who responded with enthusiasm that made Marcus's chest swell with pride. The Wellington housing project consumed most of his time. Thomas Wellington turning out to be exactly as Catherine described, brilliant but cold, capable of creating structurally perfect buildings that had no soul. "This is efficient," Thomas said during one of their first meetings, gesturing at Marcus's sketches. "But efficiency isn't always profitable. These community spaces take up square footage we could rent. But they create value in other ways," Marcus argued, finding courage he didn't know he had. "Families stay longer in buildings where they feel connected to their neighbors. Lower turnover means lower costs long-term." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "You've been here 2 weeks and you're lecturing me on long-term value. I'm offering perspective from someone who's lived in these buildings, who knows what makes them homes versus warehouses for people." The room went quiet, other engineers exchanging glances. Marcus wondered if he'd gone too far, if his inexperience had made him too bold. Then Thomas smiled, a rare expression that transformed his usually stern face. "Fair point. Keep the community spaces, but make them multifunctional. I want every square foot earning its keep." Marcus worked with Thomas's parameters, creating spaces that could be community rooms or event spaces or workout areas that served multiple purposes and justified their existence in balance sheets as well as human terms. It was a compromise, but one that felt right. On Friday of his 3rd week, Diana appeared at Marcus's desk with an envelope. "This is from Catherine. She wanted you to have it before the weekend." Inside was a handwritten note on expensive stationery. "Marcus, enclosed is your first paycheck. More than a salary, it represents what you've earned through talent and dedication. You belong here. Never doubt that. Also, Zoe's education fund is officially active. The paperwork is complete. Her future is secure. Yours is too. Believe it, Catherine." Marcus stared at the paycheck, at the number that was more than he'd ever made in a month, more than he thought possible 3 weeks ago. This was real. All of it was real. And it wasn't luck or charity. It was earned, built on choices he'd made and work he'd done, and potential he'd finally been allowed to develop. He texted Zoe, "Pizza tonight. The good place with the arcade." Her response was immediate. "Really? Yes, yes, yes. Really, we're celebrating." That night, watching Zoe win tickets at the arcade and eat pizza without worrying about the cost, Marcus felt something settle in his chest. Not just happiness, though there was that something deeper. Peace, maybe, or the knowledge that he'd made the right choice when he'd said yes to possibility. Zoe was laughing, her face flushed with joy, and Marcus realized this was what he'd been working toward all along. Not just survival, but this moments of pure, uncomplicated happiness. The ability to say yes to his daughter without calculating costs. The space to breathe without fear crushing his lungs. "Dad, come play," Zoe called, waving at him from a racing game. Marcus joined her, and they competed against each other with fierce determination. Zoe winning by a mile because Marcus kept getting distracted by her laughter, by the sound of joy he'd give anything to hear forever. Later, driving home with Zoe asleep in the back seat and a bag of arcade prizes beside her, Marcus thought about the moment on that rain-soaked road when he'd made a choice that had seemed impossible. He'd chosen to help, to risk everything, to believe that doing the right thing mattered even when it terrified him. That choice had led to this, his daughter asleep with a smile on her face, a career that fulfilled him, a future that wasn't defined by limitations. And somewhere in a hospital room that night, Catherine Reid had received a second chance at life that she was using to give second chances to others. Marcus pulled into their apartment complex and carefully carried Zoe upstairs, tucking her into bed with Mr. Bear and the stuffed unicorn she'd won at the arcade. He kissed her forehead and whispered, "Sweet dreams, baby girl. Dream big." Because now, finally, they could afford to. 3 months had passed since that rain-soaked afternoon, when Marcus's life had changed forever, and he still sometimes woke up expecting it all to be a dream. But then he'd see Zoe sleeping peacefully in her own room, wearing pajamas that actually fit, and he'd remember that this was real. The scars on his hands had faded to thin white lines, permanent reminders of the day he'd chosen courage over caution. The morning of the Wellington Project presentation arrived with unseasonable warmth for January. Marcus stood in front of his bathroom mirror this time, tying his own tie with practiced efficiency, and marveled at how much had changed. The man looking back at him had filled out slightly, no longer carrying the gaunt look of someone who skipped meals to make sure his daughter ate. His eyes were clearer, less shadowed by exhaustion and fear. He looked like someone who belonged in the world he now inhabited. "Dad, your portfolio is on the table," Zoe called from the kitchen. "And I made you toast, only slightly burned." Marcus smiled and emerged to find Zoe already dressed for school, her new backpack packed and ready. She'd grown in these 3 months too, not just physically, but in confidence. The scared little girl who'd watched her father struggle had transformed into someone who believed good things were possible because she'd seen them happen. "Thank you, sweetheart." Marcus took the toast and his portfolio, the leather case Catherine had given him last month. Inside were the finalized plans for the Wellington Project buildings. Marcus had poured his soul into designs that balanced Thomas's efficiency with his own understanding of what people needed. "Are you nervous?" Zoe asked, studying him with those too perceptive eyes. "Terrified," Marcus admitted, because he'd learned not to lie to his daughter about fear. "This is the biggest presentation I've ever done. If we get this contract, it means building something real, something that will last." "You'll be amazing. You always are." Zoe hugged him fiercely. "And tonight, no matter what happens, we'll celebrate. Because you've already won, Dad. You're doing what you love." Marcus held her close, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest. "When did you get so wise?" "I learned from the best." Zoe pulled back and grinned. "Now go. Mrs. Chen is walking me to school, and you've got buildings to sell." The drive to Reid Construction felt different today. Marcus's hands were steady on the wheel, his breathing calm despite the magnitude of what lay ahead. The presentation was scheduled for 10 o'clock, and the clients, a coalition of affordable housing advocates and city officials, would be there to evaluate whether Reid Construction understood their vision. Jim was waiting at Marcus's desk when he arrived holding 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this." Wellington's already in the conference room practicing his opening remarks. Man treats every presentation like a State of the Union address. "Is that bad?" "Depends if you like watching paint dry." Jim handed Marcus the coffee. "But here's the thing, Thomas handles the technical brilliance. You handle the heart. Together, you're unstoppable. Just don't let him dominate the room. The clients need to hear your perspective. Thomas has been doing this for 20 years. I've been doing it for 3 months. And you've lived the struggle these buildings are meant to address. That's worth more than 20 years of theory." Jim squeezed Marcus's shoulder. "Catherine handpicked you for this. Trust that she saw something worth believing in. The conference room was already filling when Marcus entered. Thomas Wellington stood at the head of the table, impeccably dressed and reviewing notes on his tablet. Rachel was setting up the visual presentation, and several other team members were arranging portfolios and materials. And there near the window was Catherine. She looked every inch the CEO today, her arm finally free of the cast, dressed in a power suit that probably cost more than Marcus's first car. But when she saw him, her expression softened into something warmer, more personal. "Marcus, good morning. Ready to change some lives today?" "Ready to try," Marcus replied, and Catherine laughed. "That's becoming your signature answer. I like it honest without being defeatist." She gestured to the portfolios on the table. "I looked at your final designs last night. They're extraordinary. You've created something that will actually matter to people." Thomas deserves most of the credit. Thomas created structurally sound buildings. You created homes. Catherine's voice dropped lower, meant only for Marcus. Don't minimize what you've done. Don't minimize who you've become. The clients arrived at precisely 10 o'clock, a group of 7 people representing different housing advocacy organizations and city departments. They looked tired, Marcus thought, like people who'd spent years fighting for scraps and learning to expect disappointment. He recognized that look. He'd worn it himself not so long ago. Thomas opened the presentation with his usual technical brilliance, walking through structural specifications and cost projections with the precision of a surgeon. The clients nodded politely, but without enthusiasm. They'd heard this before, promises of efficiency and affordability that somehow always fell short when translated to reality. Then it was Marcus's turn. He stood portfolio in hand and felt every eye in the room fix on him. The old Marcus would have wilted under that scrutiny, would have deferred to someone more experienced, more credentialed. But the new Marcus, the one who'd pulled a woman from a crushed car while a mountain fell, who'd said yes to impossible opportunities, who'd rebuilt his life from the ground up, that Marcus met their eyes steadily. I'm going to tell you something Thomas wouldn't. Marcus began, setting aside the prepared remarks he'd rehearsed. 3 months ago, I was a construction worker, barely making rent on a tiny apartment with my 9-year-old daughter. I knew what it meant to choose between heat and groceries, to tell my kid she couldn't have new shoes because the truck needed repairs. I knew what it felt like to live in a place that was shelter, but not a home. The room had gone quiet. Even Thomas looked surprised by this departure from script. When Catherine asked me to work on this project, I could have designed what everyone expects: efficient boxes that warehouse people affordably. Buildings that get the job done but don't inspire, don't uplift, don't give residents any reason to feel proud of where they live. Marcus opened his portfolio and pulled out the renderings. But I remembered what I wished for in all those apartments. I remembered what would have made the difference between surviving and actually living. He walked around the table, placing renderings in front of each client. Every unit has windows positioned for maximum natural light. Studies show sunlight reduces depression and improves children's academic performance. The community spaces are designed for multiple uses: playgrounds that become outdoor theaters, community rooms that transform into tutoring centers or job training spaces, rooftop gardens where families can grow vegetables, teaching kids where food comes from while reducing grocery costs. One of the clients, a woman named Margaret Chen, who ran a housing advocacy nonprofit, leaned forward with interest. These look expensive. How does this fit our budget constraints? We maximize prefabricated components to reduce construction costs. Thomas interjected back in his element. The designs are modular, but don't look it. We're using sustainable materials that cost less long-term through energy efficiency. But the real savings, Marcus continued, come from reducing turnover. Buildings designed with dignity keep families longer. Lower turnover means lower maintenance costs, less money spent finding new tenants, more stable communities. The upfront investment pays for itself. Another client spoke up, an older man named David Martinez from the city's housing authority. I've heard this before: promises of dignity and community. Then we get buildings that look different on the outside but feel the same on the inside. How is this different? Marcus thought about Zoe asking him similar questions about learning to trust good things again. Because I'm not designing for a demographic or a budget line. I'm designing for people like I was. People who deserve more than survival, who want their kids to come home to a place that feels safe and hopeful. He pulled out another rendering. See these varied facades. You can't tell from the outside which units are subsidized and which are market rate. No stigma, no visible division. Inside the subsidized units have the same quality finishes, the same access to amenities. Dignity isn't a luxury feature, it's built into every decision. Margaret Chen was studying the plans intently, now her finger tracing the layout of the community spaces. These gathering areas, they're distributed throughout the building, not just in the lobby. Every floor has a small communal space, Marcus explained. Somewhere kids can do homework together, where neighbors can meet, without it being a formal thing. Community happens in small moments, not just big events. We're designing for those moments. David Martinez set down the rendering and looked at Marcus with shrewd eyes. You said you were a construction worker 3 months ago. How does someone make that jump? Marcus glanced at Catherine, who nodded encouragingly. I pulled someone from a car crash. She happened to be the CEO of this company, and she decided to invest in my potential. Gave me a second chance at a dream I'd given up on. Catherine Reid. David's eyebrows rose. The story about the landslide rescue. That was you. It was, Catherine confirmed from her position near the window. Marcus risked everything to save a stranger. Now he's using his second chance to create opportunities for others. That's the kind of integrity this project needs. The room fell silent as the clients absorbed this information. Marcus could see them processing, recalibrating their expectations, perhaps wondering if this could really be different from all the disappointments that had come before. Finally, Margaret Chen spoke. Can we see the unit layouts, the actual living spaces? For the next hour, Marcus and Thomas walked the clients through every detail. Thomas handled the technical specifications, while Marcus explained the human reasoning behind each choice, why the kitchens were designed to be the heart of the home, why the bedrooms in subsidized units were sized to accommodate growing families, why the building's entrance felt welcoming rather than institutional. The questions were tough, sometimes skeptical, but Marcus answered with honesty born from experience. When they asked about challenges, he didn't hide behind corporate speak. When they pushed on costs, he acknowledged the constraints while defending the choices that mattered most. By noon, the clients were conferring quietly among themselves, while the Reid construction team waited with barely concealed tension. Marcus's shirt was damp with nervous sweat, his hands shaking slightly from adrenaline. Thomas caught his eye and gave a small nod of approval, high praise from a man who rarely acknowledged anyone. Margaret Chen stood, and the room fell silent. We've made a decision. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. Beside him, he felt Jim tense. This proposal is different from anything we've seen. It's ambitious, maybe even idealistic. Margaret paused, and Marcus felt his hopes begin to crumble. Then she smiled. But it's exactly what this city needs, what these families deserve. Reid Construction wins the contract. The room erupted in controlled celebration handshakes and congratulations. Catherine beaming with pride, Thomas looking genuinely pleased for perhaps the first time Marcus had seen. But Marcus felt almost numb with disbelief. They'd won. His designs, his vision of what affordable housing could be, was going to become real. Rachel hugged him fiercely. You did it. That presentation was incredible. We did it, Marcus corrected, looking around at the team that had supported him, taught him, believed in him when he barely believed in himself. Catherine appeared at his elbow, her eyes bright with emotion. Marcus Williams, engineer. How does it feel? Surreal, terrifying, amazing. Marcus laughed shakily. All of it at once. That's how the best victories feel. Catherine squeezed his arm. Your daughter is going to be so proud. Zoe. Marcus needed to tell Zoe. He excused himself and stepped into the hallway, pulling out his phone with trembling hands. But before he could dial, a text came through from Mrs. Chen. Zoe told whole class her father is engineer who helps people. Teacher very impressed. She waits for your news. Marcus smiled through the tears that were suddenly blurring his vision and called home. Zoe answered on the first ring, having somehow convinced Mrs. Chen to let her stay home from school to wait for news. Dad, did you win? Please tell me you won. We won 'em. We're going to build it. All of it. Zoe's scream of joy was so loud, Marcus had to hold the phone away from his ear. I knew it. I knew you would, because you're the best engineer ever, and you understand people. And Dad, I'm so proud of you. I'm proud of you too, baby girl, for believing in me even when I didn't believe in myself. That's what family does. We believe in each other. Zoe's voice softened. Mom would be proud too if she could see you now. The words hit Marcus unexpectedly. He rarely thought about Sarah anymore, had built walls around that pain. But Zoe was right. Sarah would have been proud, would have seen the man Marcus had become, and recognized the potential she'd believed in even when he couldn't. Maybe she would, Marcus said quietly. But your opinion is the only one that matters to me. Then you should know I think you're a superhero, just like I always said. After they hung up, Marcus stood in the hallway for a moment, composing himself. Through the glass walls of the conference room, he could see the client still talking with Catherine and Thomas, see Rachel showing them additional renderings, see the beginning of something that would change lives. His phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. Take the afternoon off. Celebrate with Zoe. You've earned it. Marcus didn't argue. He gathered his things, accepted congratulations from colleagues who'd become friends, and drove home with the windows down, despite the January chill, feeling the cold air sting his face and remind him this was real. Zoe was waiting on the front steps of their apartment building, Mrs. Chen beside her with a knowing smile. The moment Zoe saw Marcus's car, she launched herself down the steps and into his arms the second he opened the door. Tell me everything, every single detail. Marcus lifted her up, spinning her around the way he used to when she was smaller. How about I show you instead? The presentation boards are in my car. Want to see the buildings we're going to make? They spread the renderings across the hood of Marcus's Ford, and he walked Zoe through every design choice, every detail that would make these buildings homes instead of just housing. Mrs. Chen watched with tears in her eyes, seeing the transformation that had happened in these 3 months, not just in Marcus's circumstances, but in his soul. These people are lucky, Mrs. Chen said. They get homes built by a man who knows what home should feel like. I learned from you, Marcus replied. From watching you make our building feel like community, even when most people don't bother. Mrs. Chen waved away the compliment, but Marcus saw her pleasure. You take Zoe. Celebrate proper. I have dinner already in your apartment. Pot roast and vegetables. Real celebration food. That evening, Marcus and Zoe sat on their couch, which didn't feel quite so small anymore, and Zoe pulled out the drawing she'd made for Catherine months ago. It was starting to fade, the colors less bright, but the rainbow and smiling sun were still visible. Do you remember what you wrote? Marcus asked. Thank you for being brave, Zoe recited. I gave it to her because she almost died and you saved her, and I wanted her to remember someone cared. You know what I learned today? That bravery isn't just about the big moments. It's about all the small choices, saying yes when you're scared, trusting when you've been hurt, believing in good things even when experience tells you not to. Zoe snuggled closer. Is that why you stopped on the road that day? Because you're brave in the small ways too. Marcus thought about it, about the choice that had seemed so impossible at the time. I stopped because I wanted you to see that helping people matters. I stayed because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. But saying yes to Catherine's offer, that took a different kind of courage, the kind that risks hope instead of safety. I'm glad you risked it. Zoe yawned, the excitement of the day finally catching up with her. Because now you get to help so many people like we got helped. Marcus carried her to bed, tucking her in with Mr. Bear and the stuffed unicorn from the arcade. Dream about the future, Em. Dream big. What are you going to dream about? Maybe nothing. Maybe I'm already living the dream. After Zoe fell asleep, Marcus returned to the living room and opened his laptop. An email from Catherine was waiting. Marcus, the clients were so impressed they're already talking about a second project. Thomas says you have instincts that can't be taught. Jim says you're the best trainee he's ever mentored. I say you're proof that sometimes the best investments are in people, not portfolios. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for being exactly who you are. The world is better for it. Marcus read the email 3 times, each word settling into his chest like foundation stones. He typed a reply. Thank you for seeing something in me I'd stopped seeing in myself. For turning a moment of crisis into a lifetime of opportunity. For showing Zoe and me that good people still exist. That second chances are real. That doing the right thing sometimes does lead to the right outcome. I won't waste this gift, I promise. Catherine's response came immediately. You couldn't waste it if you tried. It was already yours. You just needed someone to help you unwrap it. Sleep well, Marcus. Tomorrow we start building dreams into reality. Marcus closed his laptop and walked to the window, looking out over the city that had once felt like a prison of limitations and now felt full of possibility. Somewhere out there were families who didn't know their lives were about to change, who would move into buildings Marcus designed and feel dignity they'd been denied elsewhere. Somewhere Catherine Reid was probably still working, driven by her second chance to make her empire mean something beyond profit margins. Somewhere Zoe was dreaming of being a veterinarian, her future secured by a trust fund that meant money would never limit her potential. And here, in a small apartment that had once felt like failure, Marcus Williams stood as living proof that one choice made in fear and courage could ripple outward in ways impossible to predict. He looked at his hands, the scars barely visible now in the dim light. These hands had torn metal and saved a life. These hands had mixed concrete and built other people's dreams. These hands had held his daughter through tears and joy, had signed contracts that would change lives, had drawn buildings that would stand long after he was gone. 6 months later, Marcus stood on an empty lot in the Riverside district, wearing a hard hat and his best suit, surrounded by city officials, future residents, and the team that had made this possible. Zoe stood beside him, wearing her own child-sized hard hat that Catherine had specially ordered. Margaret Chen from the Housing Coalition spoke first, talking about years of advocating for dignified, affordable housing for buildings that treated residents as valued community members rather than problems to be warehoused. Then Catherine spoke about Reid Construction's commitment to social responsibility, to using their resources for genuine good. Then it was Marcus's turn. He looked out at the crowd, at faces worn by struggle, at city officials used to compromising dreams, at his colleagues who'd helped him grow, at Catherine, who'd believed in him, at Zoe, who'd never stopped believing. 6 months ago, I was a construction worker who'd given up on being an engineer. I'd accepted that dreams were luxuries I couldn't afford, that survival was enough of a goal. Then something happened that changed everything. I made a choice to help someone, and that choice opened doors I thought were permanently closed. Marcus paused, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. These buildings we're about to construct represent more than affordable housing. They represent dignity. They represent the belief that everyone deserves to live in a place that feels like home, not just shelter. They represent second chances. He gestured to the empty lot. In a year, families will move into these buildings. Kids will do homework in the community rooms. Neighbors will meet in the rooftop gardens. And maybe, just maybe, someone struggling like I was will look at these buildings and see possibility instead of limitation. See hope instead of just survival. Zoe tugged his sleeve, and Marcus bent down. "Tell them the truth, Dad," she whispered. "Tell them what you told me." Marcus straightened and looked at Catherine, who nodded encouragingly. The truth is, I designed these buildings for myself, for the person I was 6 months ago, struggling to give my daughter a decent life. Every choice. The natural light, the community spaces, the dignity in design, comes from remembering what I wished for in all those years of just getting by. If these buildings can give other families what I wished for, then they'll be exactly what they're meant to be. The crowd erupted in applause, and Marcus saw tears on Margaret Chen's face, saw David Martinez nodding approval, saw Catherine beaming with pride. But the face he focused on was Zoe's, glowing with joy and certainty that her father was exactly the hero she'd always believed him to be. They broke ground together. Marcus, Catherine, Margaret, David, and Zoe, each shoveling symbolic dirt while cameras flashed and the future took its first tangible form. That night, after the ceremonies and celebrations, after Zoe was asleep, clutching her miniature hard hat, Marcus sat at his kitchen table with his notebook. He didn't sketch buildings this time. Instead, he wrote a letter he'd been composing in his head for months. Dear Sarah, I know you can't read this, but I need to say it anyway. I kept my promise to you. I raised our daughter to be brave and kind and wise beyond her years. I taught her that helping people matters, that doing the right thing is worth the cost. And she taught me that it's okay to accept help too, that second chances are real if you're brave enough to take them. I met someone not like that, not romantically, but someone who changed our lives by believing in me when I'd stopped believing in myself. Because of her, I'm an engineer now. Because of her, Zoe's future is secure. Because of her, I'm building homes for families like we were giving them the dignity we wished for. I think you'd like Catherine. I think you'd be proud of what we're doing. I think you'd be proud of the man I've become, even though it took me losing everything to find it. I miss you every day. But I'm okay now. We're okay. And I finally understand what you meant when you said that sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same thing. I love you. I always will. But I'm ready to live again, not just survive. Thank you for Zoe. Thank you for believing in me once upon a time. Thank you for everything. Marcus. He folded the letter and tucked it into the back of his notebook next to the sketch of the house with big windows and a welcoming porch. Someday he'd build that house. Maybe next year, maybe in 5 years. But he'd build it because dreams weren't impossible anymore. They were just blueprints waiting to be realized. Marcus turned off the lights and settled onto the couch that he really should replace now that they could afford it. But maybe he'd keep it a little longer, this reminder of where they'd come from, this proof that good things could grow in small spaces if you gave them enough love and courage. His phone buzzed one last time. A text from Catherine. Saw the photos from today. You looked like you belonged up there, Marcus. Because you do. Sleep well. Tomorrow we keep building. Marcus smiled and set the phone down. Tomorrow they'd keep building. Tomorrow Zoe would go to school and tell everyone about the groundbreaking. Tomorrow he'd go to the office and continue working on designs that would become homes. But tonight, in the quiet dark of an apartment that had witnessed transformation, Marcus Williams allowed himself to feel the full weight of gratitude for the choice he'd made on a rain-soaked road, for the courage to say yes when fear screamed no, for the daughter who'd believed in rainbows, even when reality suggested otherwise, for the woman who'd turned a debt into an investment in human potential. The scars on his hands caught the moonlight one last time. Some scars represented trauma loss, pain to be forgotten. But these scars were different. These scars were proof that sometimes when you reach out to save someone else, you end up saving yourself too. And that, Marcus thought as he finally closed his eyes, was the truest definition of grace, not the absence of struggle, but the courage to help anyway, to hope anyway, to believe that one person's choice could change everything. The mountain had fallen, but from its wreckage, 2 lives had been rebuilt stronger and truer than before. And the buildings they would create together would stand as monuments not to their success, but to their shared understanding that everyone deserves dignity, opportunity, and the courage to dream. That was the real breakthrough. That was what changed everything. Not the rescue itself, but what they chose to do with the second chances it provided. Marcus slept peacefully that night, his daughter safe in the next room, his future stretching out before him, like an empty lot waiting for foundations ready to be built into something beautiful and lasting and true.